Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. As a villain, I really can't become stronger anymore. Chapter 1. How long is the sentence for defiling a nun? Ron had to think about this issue very seriously, because there was a nun lying under him, or the nun who would become the white saint of the Church of the Dawn Goddess in the future, Aurelia. The room is huge. 3 magic lamps can barely provide enough light to the room. The magic lamps illuminate the wall, and you can clearly see the twisted portraits in pink, purple, and black hanging on it. The naked limbs are entangled like snakes. Together, it releases the ultimate indulgence and a little bit of gloom and depression. The room is a bit empty, without much decoration, and only a large bed stands out. On the big bed lay a nun. She has beautiful cheeks and a few messy hairs hanging from the corners of her mouth. The nun's figure is very well proportioned. She is the kind of woman who is just right and slightly fleshy, and can show off her feminine charm better than a slender woman. The holy nun's uniform has become messy, and the fair skin shines with a hazy luster under the soft magic lamp. Her long silver hair was spread out on the bed, contrasting with the messy black nun's uniform, creating a strong visual stimulation, especially when the hem was torn open, exposing a pair of plump white legs. She exuded a witch-like temptation in her holiness. Ron used to be an out-and-out black stocking fan, but now he is thinking very seriously about which one is heretical, black stockings or white legs. Although Ron knew that now was not the time to think about these things, he had to admit that this woman was really charming. Aurelia's hands were tied to the head of the bed, her feet were tied to the end of the bed, and her slim body was forced to pose in a shameful pose. Her porcelain doll-like face flushed red, and her soft golden eyes stared intently at the man on top of her. The man's crazy, beast-like gaze frightened her, and his rough tearing of the nun's uniform made her hair stand on end. Aurelia is a pure nun, but she is not ignorant. She already has a rough idea of how she will be treated next. Outside the room, she could clearly feel countless hot and rapid breathing sounds. They were all waiting. For a nun, that ending was even more difficult to accept than death. The only good thing is that as soon as this shameless man tore off her nun's uniform, her body suddenly trembled, as if she was electrocuted, and she just stayed there, motionless, with even a slight trace of anger in his eyes, of confusion. It seems like someone suddenly changed. As a result, her chastity was preserved for a while longer. Aurelia did not expect this man to have a conscience. For members of the Eternal Freedom sect, conscience was a luxury that never existed. Aurelia twisted her wrist quickly and hard, trying to break free of the chains on her body. Unfortunately, Aurelia's struggle not only failed to loosen the rope, but instead tied it tighter and tighter. Straight marks began to appear on her chest, making her already proud figure look even more exaggerated, and her clothes were about to tear. At this moment, Ron's eyes fell on Aurelia again. She was frightened, and her struggling movements stopped subconsciously. It seemed to be to cover up the fear and cowardice deep in her heart, or maybe to strengthen her inner strength. Faith, Aurelia opened her lips. Despicable and shameless degenerate, even if you get my body, you can't even think of tainting my soul. Ron glanced at Aurelia. Don't worry, I have no interest in polluting your soul. It is indeed the style of the Eternal Freedom sect. They don't care about spiritual pleasure at all, they don't expect emotional satisfaction, they don't long for soul fusion, they only pursue physical pleasure. They worship the God of eternal freedom, do not follow any legal or moral constraints, and indulge in indulgence and madness. They are a group of beasts in heat, sharing the prey they catch. As the most senior cadre of the branch, Ron can undoubtedly allocate to the most delicious piece of it. Understanding that she could not avoid being violated, Aurelia, who had reaffirmed her faith, no longer struggled. Her face was extremely cold, as if it were covered with a layer of frost that would not change for thousands of years. I will kill you with my own hands. Ron chuckled and said, "Beautiful nun, if I say, violating you is to save the world, would you believe it?" Aurelia made a strange sound from her mouth, and then looked at Ron as if she were an idiot. That look is like saying, do you think I will believe it? Do you think I'm stupid? Wouldn't the world be destroyed if he didn't invade her? The dogs didn't believe it. It is as expected. Ron was helpless. He was obviously telling the truth, so why didn't anyone believe him? Without explaining too much, Ron moved his body away from Aurelia, grabbed the torn hem of the nun's uniform, and covered the long white legs. He didn't want to die so soon. Suppressing the flames in his chest caused by the intoxication of too many potions, Ron sat on the chair, tapping his fingers lightly on the table in front of him, chaotic and incomplete memories flooding into his mind. He is a time traveler. When he saw Aurelia, he knew that this was the world of the game, Goddess. What's even more unfortunate is that his identity after time travel is Ron, a poor guy with the same name as him. He was originally the bastard son of a foreign duke. Because he did not have very good magical talent, he was not taken seriously. He was also affected by the power struggle within the family and was exiled. Later, he was targeted by the Eternal Freedom sect because he was quite accomplished in the study of ancient characters. The knowledge he mastered was extremely important for the sect to decipher ancient inscriptions. This is a very mysterious religion. Although the indulgent trend is like a scourge, it is already harming the youth of the kingdom. But where the headquarters of the Eternal Freedom sect is still a mystery. Even if Ron is very important, he is not qualified to enter the headquarters. He was appointed to the branch and became the nominal top official here. In order for Ron to fully integrate into the Eternal Freedom sect's big family, the headquarters issued an order to arrest a nun and prepare to complete Ron's initiation ceremony in advance. In order to prevent Ron from resisting, he also gave him a large amount of magic potion. Before Ron took possession of this body, the original owner of the body had been fighting the urge brought by the potion, and he did not want to completely degenerate into a cultist. This poor guy has no idea that according to the game's plot, Aurelia's fiancé Herman has led the Knights of the Dawn and is preparing to burn this place to the ground. He didn't want to fall, but he couldn't withstand the erosion of the magic potion. Herman didn't give the poor guy a chance to explain. He chopped him into pieces inch by inch and scattered his ashes. Before he died, he endured the most cruel torture in the world. His strong resentment turned his soul into an evil spirit, and he personally caused the Larnaca tragedy, leading to the death of thousands of priests of the Church of the Dawn Goddess. From then on, he completely became a villain. What he didn't even know was that this incident had become a nightmare that could never be overcome in Aurelia's heart, torturing Aurelia all the time. Herman had a grudge against Aurelia and broke off the engagement soon after. The clergy of the Church of the Goddess of Dawn believed that Aurelia's existence was detrimental to the dignity of the church, and they were sarcastic, humiliating and bullying. Aurelia couldn't feel the slightest warmth. In extreme despair, her bloodline awakened and became an absolutely indispensable force to seal the god of eternal freedom and save the world. Ron wasn't lying, this poor hapless guy indirectly saved the world. The plot of this dog-fighting game is simply a mess, full of depression and madness. If he were replaced, he would not be able to live up to the title of P-Club's outstanding player if he didn't kill everyone. Of course, this game is not without its merits. First of all, the painting style is extremely exquisite. Whether it is the characters that the player can control, or the NPCs in the game, the vertical drawing and modeling have almost reached the limits of the industry. Secondly, the game is very open, and all NPCs are playable characters. Once the favorability reaches a close level, it can even trigger some plots and scenes that gentlemen like to see. If it weren't for this reason, Ron wouldn't be bothered to build a ladder to climb over the wall. Now, the task of saving the world falls on him. Likewise, the fate of being chopped into pieces by Herman will also befall him. Outside the room, there was even a second in command in the branch who wanted to kill him and replace him as a senior cadre. This is simply a heaven-shattering start. At this moment, a cold voice that sounded like mechanical synthesis suddenly sounded in Ron's ears. Beep, congratulations to the host for opening the Goddess X Black Beast Infinite Death System. Mission background. This is the beginning of the darkest hour. The dawn has dissipated, the goddess has fallen asleep, and the worship of demons has reappeared in the world. The Church of the Dawn Goddess controls the power of the world, but its virtues have gradually withered. Task description. Herman was extremely angry that you abducted his fiancée. He gathered 500 outstanding Dawn Knights to surround Bruno Street and vowed to cut you into pieces and scatter your ashes before your life was restored. 10 minutes left. Optional mission goal 1. Follow the guidance of fate, invade Aurelia, push Aurelia completely into the abyss of despair, activate the bloodline, and then be killed by Herman. Task reward. None. You will become an unknown hero. You will sacrifice your own death in exchange for the hope of the human race. Optional mission goal 2. Try to survive. Task reward. Random. Death countdown. 600 seconds. Ron's plugin finally arrived and the system was activated. However, the system did not provide him with a means to survive, it only gave Ron a choice. There are two paths: indulge and then die, or rack your brains and struggle to chase the small hope of survival, and the world may be destroyed as a result. On both sides of the scale, one side is your own life, and the other side is the lives of billions of people in this world. No need to doubt, you must choose your own life. This is just a game. Ron does not have the sentiment to sacrifice himself for others and be willing to be an unsung hero. He is not the Holy Mother. Although Aurelia is a very attractive nun, in Ron's heart, his own life is more important after all. As long as he is alive, there are infinite possibilities. He will not give up a forest for a tree. What's more, he only had 10 minutes to appreciate the beauty of this tree. However, how to survive is a difficult problem. Ron's magic power was very weak. It was almost impossible to survive the siege of Herman and the 500 paladins with that little bit of weak magic power and a small fireball. Ron tapped his fingers lightly on the table with a calm expression. Although the death countdown was constantly turning and the ticking sound kept reminding him that death was approaching, he did not panic. At this time, it is even more important to stay calm. Panic will have no effect on changing the predicament. Although the system temporarily determined that the enemies who would kill him were Herman and the 500 Dawn Knights, Ron did not completely rely on the system. He knew very well that there was another force that wanted to kill him. The second in command of the Larnaca City branch of the Eternal Freedom Sect, Don Farouk. In the game, the reason why Ron failed to escape and was killed was due to Don Farouk's betrayal. There are also branches that are almost entirely attached to followers of Don Farouk. With the help of Herman, they killed the original owner of this body. Ron's lips twitched slightly. This was a number of more than 600. You can imagine how difficult it is to survive in front of such a large enemy. He has just traveled to this world, does it need to be so difficult? Is there no novice protection period? A burst of annoyance emerged in his chest, but this irritability was quickly suppressed by Ron, and his brain was working rapidly. Escape. Impossible. According to the information provided by the system, the Bruno Street branch has been blocked by the Knights of Dawn, making it difficult for him to fly. Mouth escape. Impossible. For Don Farouk, who is bent on defeating the enemy, killing Ron and replacing Ron is his craziest obsession. He can even betray the interests of the Eternal Freedom Sect. Such a guy is simply impossible. I was moved by Ron's few words. As for Herman, it is even more impossible. The extremely grumpy Herman will not give Ron a chance to speak, and will directly chop him into pieces. Even if he has the power of tongue blooming, he will not use it at all. Chance. From this point of view, there is only one choice left for Ron. Fight and rely on absolute strength to survive. Although this is also nonsense to the weak Ron, but excluding all possibilities, this is the final answer. Ron's brain began to look for conditions that were favorable to him. He has cleared the game and knows where the plot is going. He knows the location of all treasure chests, which treasure chest can produce high-level magic, and which treasure chest can produce legendary equipment. He knows the methods of all dungeon strategies, and also knows the personalities and weaknesses of all important characters. He also knows all the bugs in the game. Ron suddenly smiled. Found it. Bug. In this way, the 9 minutes left before Herman arrived were extremely precious to Ron. Aurelia stared at Ron silently, and she suddenly felt that he didn't look like a member of the Eternal Freedom Sect. At this moment Ron stood up. Aurelia's shoulders shrank, her slender neck squirmed subconsciously, she swallowed, and her big golden eyes stared at Ron with vigilance and fear. If possible, Aurelia would even cross her arms. What are you going to do? Ron glanced at Aurelia. Don't worry, I have no interest in violating you. Unless I want to save the world, I have no intention of. Hurt you. He couldn't waste this short time on Aurelia. Besides, after 9 minutes, who are you looking down on? Hiss. Aurelia gasped. A flush instantly appeared on her face, and her body was trembling. She was furious. She knew she shouldn't react like this, that Ron wasn't going to violate her and she should be happy. But I couldn't help but be angry. What does this fool mean? He would rather the world be destroyed than do anything to her. Is she so unbearable? Aurelia's eyes were spitting fire, and she stared at Ron with gritted teeth. In Aurelia's heart, the urge to kill Ron was stronger than ever. That look made Ron feel a little strange. What's going on with this woman? I don't even intend to hurt her, why are I still so angry? There must be something wrong with your brain. Sure enough, women are complex creatures that are difficult to understand. If you violate her, she will hate you and want to kill you. If you don't violate her, she will still hate you and want to kill you. Ron shook his head, ignored Aurelia, turned around and walked behind the screen. The pure nun lost her etiquette and made a sharp voice, Ron, you. The silver moonlight filled the streets of Bruno, and the entire ground was covered with a layer of cold frost. The night wind was moist and sticky, brushing everyone's face like an invisible hand. Just outside the main hall of the Eternal Freedom Sect branch, a large number of believers gathered. There is no doubt that these people are all scum that cannot be killed with 1,000 cuts. Hearing Aurelia's scream, strange and obscene expressions appeared on everyone's faces. Tisk tisk tisk. Although I am quite unhappy with Ron, a guy who has no strength and sits in the position of a senior cadre, I have to admit that this guy seems to be quite capable in that regard. Look, the nun who was once so pure is now shouting Ron's name and is not willing to let Ron leave. How enviable. I wonder what Aurelia's fiancé Herman's expression would be when he saw this scene. I think it will be particularly exciting. Ron took out a round strengthening stone from the storage ring. As a real world evolved from a game, it is full of traces of the game, such as the properties of equipment. Ron had a heavy magic book with a black cover in his hand. Hardcover edition of Dark Bible, White Ordinary. Enhancement level 0. Magic attack +5. Physical attack +7. Every member of the Eternal Freedom Sect has a holy book. Although it is a hardcover version, it does not seem to be any different from the ordinary version except that it is particularly heavy. Compared with using magic, it seems to be more effective when used to hit people. He took a deep breath, put his right hand on his left chest to draw a rising sun, looked serious, and shouted in a low voice. Praise the goddess of dawn. A believer of the evil god, a member of the Eternal Freedom Sect, actually made the standard prayer gestures of the Church of the Dawn Goddess, and chanted prayers that were absolutely blasphemous. No matter how you look at it, this scene is ridiculous. Ron let go of his left hand, and the strengthening stone in his palm naturally fell on the hardcover version of the Dark Bible. The next moment, a soft white light appeared, and the self-sealing page appeared. In front of Ron, the strengthening number of the Dark Bible has changed from 0 to 1. The reinforcement was successful. Bug can still be used. In the game, the combat power provided by equipment is extremely exaggerated. As for the improvement brought by equipment, more than 90% comes from strengthening. No matter how advanced the equipment is, the initial value will not be too exaggerated. For fully strengthened equipment, the attributes may be 10 times or even more than the initial value. Highly enhanced equipment can even add some additional special effects. Even the lowest level whiteboard equipment, as long as the reinforcement value is high enough, its destructive power cannot be underestimated. As for Gory's game company, the success rate of enhancement is set very low. As the number of enhancement layers increases, the equipment value increases become more and more exaggerated, but the success probability is as low as going through the 18th level of hell. If the enhancement is above +10, the success rate, I'm afraid it's not 1 in 1,000, but 1 in 10,000. What's worse is that once the enhancement fails, the enhancement level may drop, or even the equipment may be shattered. Of course, the game company has thoughtfully prepared mythical props called lucky gems for players. Just one lucky gem can greatly increase the success rate of enhancement. Even if it fails, the equipment will not drop the enhancement value, let alone be shattered. Conscience, right, 1,648 can buy 3 lucky gems, and the gaming company is losing money. This poor setting caused dissatisfaction among a large number of players, so some bosses directly cracked the game and implanted a bug in the game. As long as the character is strengthened, the character can be manipulated to make the prayer gesture of the Church of the Dawn Goddess, and input blasphemy, praise the goddess's spell can be 100% successful if strengthened. When Ron finished the game, this bug had not yet been fixed. This is a try. If it doesn't work, then you can only find a way to escape. There are many strengthening stones stored in the storage ring. Praise be to the goddess of dawn. With Ron's deep voice, the second strengthening stone was thrown out. On the dark Bible, soft white lights flashed continuously. When the light finally stopped, the properties of the dark Bible had changed drastically. Hardcover version of the dark Bible. Although it is white and ordinary, when the enhancement reaches the full level, it is no longer ordinary. Enhancement level 13. Magic attack plus 164. Physical attack plus 275. Additional special effect. Natural divine power. Those who hold this Bible will have an increase in strength attribute of 182. Additional special effect. Knowledge as power. When using this Bible to cause physical attacks on the target, the effect is doubled. A smile finally broke out on Ron's face, and he could feel how much this piece of equipment that enhanced the full 13 had improved him. And this is just a piece of equipment. What would it look like if all the equipment in the body could be fully strengthened? Coupled with my understanding of the world, this time, I have the advantage. In the silent room, Aurelia was lying on the soft big bed. That guy Ron seemed to have no interest in her at all. He left her here and left. Aurelia was relieved that at least her virginity had been preserved, but she also felt extremely humiliated. For the first time, she had doubts about her own charm. Golden eyes turned, Aurelia turned to look in the direction of Ron. The guy was hiding behind the screen and didn't know what he was doing. He just heard excited voices from time to time, and occasionally saw white light flashing behind the screen. Aurelia's face was pale. Could it be that Ron was preparing some special props and wanted to torture herself severely? Is it a whip or a candle? Some bad images appeared in the innocent nun's little mind. She once saw a bishop and a nun like this. The innocent Aurelia believed that all loving was carried out in this way, which frightened her. Ron's excited voice also floated outside the door, making the Eternal Freedom sect believers look strange. It seemed that the leader was having a great time. It is estimated that Aurelia has been tortured so much that she can no longer hear the sound. It's really enviable. At this moment, boom boom boom. The street suddenly rumbled and shook, the sound of chaotic footsteps came from afar, and the earth trembled. Around the branch of the Eternal Freedom sect, an additional figure appeared at some point. They were wearing bright silver armor, with a cold light shining under the moonlight, and their chests were all engraved with the pattern of the rising sun, which was the symbol of the Church of the Goddess of Dawn. At a glance, there are figures of knights everywhere, densely packed with at least hundreds of them. Right at the front of this group of knights, there is a man at least 1.8 meters tall, strong, mighty and majestic, with silver mixed with. The golden armor shows his identity. He is better than ordinary knights and is a captain of the knights. Without the humility and stability of the knight, the rough face was full of anger, and the eyes were bloodshot, as if there were flames burning. Aurelia's fiancé Herman finally appears. The faces of the believers of the Eternal Freedom sect showed a trace of astonishment at first, as if they did not expect Herman to find this place, but soon, the astonishment turned into twisted madness and ridicule. They were clearly facing enemies several times their own, but they were not afraid at all. Death is not something to be feared, it is simply returning to the arms of the gods. Pain and pleasure are ways to please the God of eternal freedom. Ah, distinguished young knight, Mr. Captain Herman, you are finally here. A male believer crossed his hands on his chest and nodded slightly to Herman. The word, small, in his voice seemed to have a little bit of yin and yang in it, of extension. Don Farouk, the branch's second highest executive, had great hopes of taking over the position of leader after the previous leader left. However, Ron, who flew down from the air, crushed all his ambitions. This directly caused Farouk to be extremely dissatisfied with Ron, even hating him. He was thinking about one question all the time: what if there was no Ron? Don Farouk's posture is sloppy, but his movements are exceptionally elegant. Your fiancé is having an in-depth communication with our leader in the house. If your guess is correct, the child may be pregnant. Do you want to think about the name of the child in advance? After all, she is your fiancé. Hiss. Herman's body shook violently, and his eyes were about to burst. At this moment, he only felt a flash of emerald green light blooming on his forehead. After all, it was too late. The knights all around looked at Herman with pity in their eyes. And pity made Herman even more angry. He felt that all his face, the glory of being a knight of the dawn, and the dignity of the nobility, all disappeared in this moment. He could even imagine that from now on he would be reduced to the aristocracy, the saddest laughingstock among the clergy. Herman, who was extremely furious, could no longer bear it, and with a swish sound, the sword blade tore through the night sky. After strengthening all the equipment in his body, Ron finally walked out from behind the screen. The dazzling light produced by the highly enhanced equipment was hidden by him. At first glance, there was no difference from before. The movement outside also caught Ron's attention. He just smiled and didn't care. The improvement brought about by the full body strengthening is enough to allow Ron to face all kinds of dangers calmly. He silently walked to Aurelia's side and stretched out his hands towards Aurelia. Aurelia's face was extremely pale, and she thought that her pure body would eventually be desecrated, but she didn't expect that Ron just reached out and grabbed the chain. Immediately, bang! The shackles that Ron had absolutely no way to break were completely turned into dregs at this moment and were shattered easily. Beautiful nun, I'm sorry for bringing you bad memories. I must emphasize that I was forced. I have no intention of hurting you. And now, you're free. Your fiancé is here. Ron smiled. Aurelia was still a little confused, but she was still very happy to hear that her fiancé had come to save her. With a blush of happiness on her face, she quickly got up from the bed and nodded to Ron, "Thank you for your integrity. The goddess of dawn will forgive every citizen who has returned from the lost way." Then she rushed towards the door. It's just that Aurelia has been tied up for too long, and her hands and feet are very sore. She finally got free, but her limbs didn't obey her orders. She stumbled and was about to fall. Ron, who was close at hand, subconsciously reached out to support Aurelia from behind. The thin fabric of the nun's uniform cannot completely block Aurelia's delicate skin. Under her fingers is her slender waist, which is soft, bouncy, and warm. This special position directly allowed Aurelia's extremely elastic, slender thighs and buttocks to press against Ron's lower abdomen. "Ah, thank you." Aurelia said thank you habitually, which is the training of a nun. Immediately afterwards, Aurelia felt something was wrong. Perhaps due to the influence of her obsession with potions, Aurelia could vaguely feel a different temperature on her legs, and she subconsciously wanted to break away from Ron's arms. Almost at the same time, there was a clang and the door shattered. The fierce battle outside the house was replaced by a moment of tranquility. A pair of eyes stared into the room. Aurelia was leaning in Ron's arms. Her nun's uniform was messy and the hem was torn. Her pretty face was red, her breathing was rapid, and her body was twisting uneasily. Oh my God, this is so indiscreet. With such a scene, even an idiot can imagine what happened before. Isn't it a bit too intense? Do you want to come standing? Herman's head buzzed even more. His face was extremely livid, and it felt like his whole head was green and bluish. He even saw the chains that had just been broken on the bed. It was not difficult to imagine how the two people communicated not long ago. What was most difficult for Herman to accept was that he couldn't even see much sadness and hatred on Aurelia's face, and she even had some joy. "Sir Herman, your fiancé seems very happy. Could it be that? You are actually a little bit bad at that, so that's why. It's really pitiful." The ridicule of the Eternal Freedom sect believers constantly aroused Herman's anger, and they seemed to be consciously encouraging Herman to attack Ron. They knew that Ron was powerful and could never be Herman's opponent. If you die, the position becomes vacant. Herman became more and more angry, and his chest was about to explode. Aurelia was so excited that she didn't hear the noise outside the door. She only knew that her fiancé had come to pick her up. She stood up and ran towards the door again. Looking at her fiancé outside the door, Aurelia's face was filled with happiness. Herman. She wanted to tell her fiancé the pain and fear of this short period of time. "Shut up," Herman shouted loudly. His usually beautiful and elegant fiancé only made him feel disgusting at this moment. For a moment, Aurelia froze on the spot, her big golden eyes blank, and she didn't know how to react. She had obviously just experienced a fear she had never experienced in her life. She had obviously just escaped death. Herman ignored Aurelia. His fire-breathing eyes stared at Ron behind Aurelia, and his sharp sword pointed at Ron's heart. Aurelia's face changed slightly, and she spoke subconsciously. Don't be impulsive, Herman, you misunderstood, Mr. Ron is not that kind of person. Although he didn't know the reason, Ron did not hurt himself. He seemed to have something hidden, and other believers were also extremely repelled by him. The believers of the Eternal Freedom sect around him sighed in admiration. So amazing. This is completely putting the nun in sleeping clothes. Herman was even more angry. His body was trembling violently, and roars like beasts came from his throat. Red light emerged from Herman's body. The surrounding temperature soared instantly and the air became distorted. The next second, Herman stamped his feet hard on the ground, and his body was instantly ejected, like a meteor falling from the sky. The sharp sword pointed straight at Ron's heart. Everyone thought Ron was dead. The Templar Knights behind Herman all know how powerful the squad leader is. The members of the Eternal Freedom sect on both sides had no intention of stopping Herman, with gloating smiles on their faces. Everyone was looking forward to the scene where Ron's heart was penetrated and blood spurted out. Aurelia wanted to stop it, but it was too late. She could only watch as the sword got closer and closer to Ron's chest. She closed her eyes and couldn't bear to look anymore. Crunch. At this moment, she suddenly heard an unusually sharp sound in her ears, like rough metal rubbing. A stream of sparks exploded in the night sky. The long sword stopped at Ron's heart. Everyone thought Ron's heart had been penetrated. But soon, the smiles on their faces stiffened. Something was wrong. No blood spurted out, and Herman's face looked as horrifying as if he had seen a ghost. On the contrary, it was Ron who smiled and pinched the red sword blade from the side with 2 fingers. Hiss. Looking at the sword tip that was only half an inch away from Ron's heart, everyone gasped. Raising his eyebrows, Ron glanced at Herman. That's it. That's it. In an instant, the entire space was deathly silent. Only Ron's doubtful and disdainful voice floated in everyone's ears. The voice was very soft, but it was like a heavy hammer hitting the chest. Both the Knights of the Dawn Knights and the believers of the Eternal Freedom sect were all stunned, watching this scene motionless. 2 fingers, holding the long sword that Herman thrust out with all his strength in anger. How is this possible? The impact was too great, and the thoughts that Ron was dead that came to his mind were like loud slaps on the face, causing burning pain. Isn't he a weak leader who came down from the air? Isn't this guy a paleophilologist? Not a rookie magician. When did the strength of scholars and magicians become so exaggerated that it would not allow people to live? Extraordinary, panic, disaster, hero, epic, legend, destruction, myth. Although the panic level is not a master, it is by no means a weakling. Could it be equipment? Don Farouk made a confused voice. Didn't you realize that Ron's good-looking junk equipment is all worthless and useless, and how much combat power can it provide? The companion next to him immediately shook his head. Don Farouk muttered again. Can't they all be strengthened to +10 or more? His companion immediately cast a look full of contempt, and he even forgot that Don Farouk was his superior. No way, absolutely impossible. Are you stupid? Who would be so stupid to strengthen these blank slates? Besides, don't you know how difficult it is to strengthen to a +10? There are only a few pieces of equipment in the entire kingdom that can be strengthened to a +10. There was unconcealable shock in Shishi Suo's voice. No one understands why Ron suddenly became so strong. They can only speculate that this insidious guy may be hiding his strength. At the same time, Herman might, maybe, probably not be as strong as rumored. After all, even if they are at the same panic level, the difference is huge. On the contrary, the Knights of the Dawn Knights behaved with extra dignity. They knew Herman's strength best, and he was by no means a rookie who had just entered the panic level. There is a huge difference between holding the sword blade with 2 fingers and blocking Herman's sword. Ron's strength is far stronger than imagined. No one knows that the reinforced shoes under Ron's feet not only provide super high agility, but also come with a special effect. Extreme dodge, 100% avoidance of attacks directed at him, which can be triggered once a day. Even if you really can't hold it, you can still avoid it. The sound in his ears seemed to be mocking him, and it kept getting into his head, irritating Herman's sensitive nerves, and almost driving him crazy. In the church, he had always been called a genius, but this was the first time he suffered such humiliation. He is angry and unwilling. He tried to struggle, to fight back. He tried to pull the sword back, but Ron's two fingers were like iron pliers locking the sword tightly. No matter how hard he tried, the sword body would not move at all. At this moment, Ron took out the Dark Bible magic book. Everyone was shocked, their faces were solemn, and they all stared at Ron. Two fingers could easily hold Herman's sword, and they couldn't help but have some expectations in their hearts, wanting to see what Ron's magic level was. After all, this guy is a magician. Just when all the eyes were staring at him, Ron slowly raised his right hand, and the Dark Bible was raised accordingly. The atmosphere of the scene was aroused, and the tension was extremely tense. Even the sounds of breathing and heartbeat, they all disappeared at this moment. Herman was even more horrified. He didn't know what magic Ron would use. Maybe in the next moment, his body would be reduced to ashes. Just when the atmosphere was almost solidified, Ron's raised right hand suddenly dropped. In Herman's widened eyes, the Dark Bible was getting bigger. What kind of magic is this? A flash of confusion suddenly flashed through Herman's mind, and the next moment, Pia, the Dark Bible slapped Herman in the face. Bah! The tall body was shot away, and Herman was stuck to the wall. Knowledge is power. At this moment, the already silent scene became so silent that you could hear a pin drop. The expressions of many paladins changed drastically. This man's strength was beyond imagination. He didn't even use the magic he was good at. He simply tapped Herman with the Dark Bible. Could it be that this Ron is a disaster-level powerhouse? This is too scary. Ron was also slightly stunned. He didn't expect that the special effects brought by the advanced enhancement of the Dark Bible were so strong. Then he bent down and bowed, made an almost perfect etiquette, and apologized sincerely. "I'm very sorry. The force I used seemed too strong." Big puff. When Herman, who was still clinging to the wall and wriggling like a maggot, heard this, his chest suddenly deflated and a mouthful of old blood spurted out. "It's heartbreaking to kill people." The voice seemed to be saying, "I really didn't expect you to be so weak." As an outstanding genius, Herman grew up with all kinds of praise, and has inevitably developed an arrogant character. But now all his pride and dignity were crushed to pieces by Ron, and then he stepped heavily on him. Unable to bear it anymore, Herman desperately raised his neck and made a tearing sound. "Kill him, everyone, come together, kill him." However, except for Herman's roar, there was no movement around. The system's countdown continued. Ron looked relaxed, but he knew that the threat was not completely over. Hundreds of knights led by Herman swarmed forward and might really drown him. But now those knights didn't dare to take action at all. Instead of stepping forward, they even took 2 steps back. Some knights looked at Herman with some complaints. They really don't take the lives of their brothers seriously. Now it is not a question of whether everyone can kill Ron together, but a question of whether this terrible guy will go on a killing spree. The death countdown will be cleared directly to 0 when there is 1 minute left. Beep. The system prompts, "Congratulations to the host for completing the mission and successfully surviving. Reward: a copy of the system skin, black and white, light and dark." Ron's forehead is full of black lines. What's the use of this reward? System skin. There are many games that sell skins, but this is the first time I have encountered one that sells skins for the system. What, could this skin also turn the system into a beauty? Looks pleasing to the eye. What's the use of pleasing the eyes? What he needs now is a way to make himself stronger, not to look good. At this moment, Ron suddenly felt a slight itching in the ears on both sides of his cheeks, and some hair strands were scattered from both sides. One side is silvery white, the other side is pitch black. Just like her eyes, one side is dark and the other side is silvery white. Ron couldn't describe her face. No matter how gorgeous the words were, she would look pale and light, as if she couldn't exist in the human world. His heart trembled slightly for a moment. That was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. Aurelia was already a very beautiful woman, but compared to the image manifested by the system, she was not even half as good. There was no trace of emotion on her beautiful face, which was indifferent and tranquil, just like a pure and beautiful statue. Her eyes are like the most beautiful and pure gems in the world. If there really is a goddess in this world, she is probably nothing more than this. The slender body floated behind Ron, like a ghost, with long black and white hair fluttering gently, graceful legs hanging down leisurely, and the white toes pointing downward naturally. Immediately afterwards, the system's voice sounded in Ron's ears again. System prompt. Times 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 interference times 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 times. Beep. The system prompts that the repairman repairs the world line and returns the world line to normal. Congratulations to the host for activating the special function of the system. Activate Special Mission 1. Capture the White Saint Aurelia and obtain the Holy Heart. Activate Special Mission 2. Capture Blood Rose Ariana and obtain the Heroic Heart. Activate Special Mission 3. Defeat Dolores of Thorns and Rose and obtain the Heart of Nobleness. Activate Special Mission 13. Strategy System and obtain the Eternal Heart. All the strategy tasks are completed, you can open the door. Except for Ron, no one else can see the image manifested by the system. Half of Herman's face, which had just fallen to the ground, was swollen, his face was cracked, and streaks of blood oozed out. His mouth was filled with blood. He spat, spitting out a few broken teeth. His body was squirming like maggots, and he tried to get up from the ground, but all his limbs were numb and refused to obey his orders at all. Aurelia sniffed hard. Although she had just been treated roughly, Herman was her fiancé after all. She walked over and reached out to grab her fiancé's arm. With the help of Aurelia, Herman finally got up from the ground. He was panting heavily. After a long time, he could finally feel the presence of his limbs, and his swaying body gradually returned to normal. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the timid fiancé next to him, and the anger in his heart subsided a little. However, when he thought that because of her, he had been embarrassed in front of the public, a feeling of disgust so strong that he felt sick came to his heart again, and he shook his hand vigorously, pushing Aurelia down. Go away, you shameless thing. Herman didn't care about Aurelia at all, and stared at Ron with his bloodshot eyes, as if he were the most ferocious beast, trying to tear Ron into pieces. Kill him, kill him, kill him. Herman roared in his heart, but after all he didn't dare to make any move. Aurelia fell to the ground, her silver hair was scattered, and she looked embarrassed and messy. She lowered her head, her eyes were red, and the grievance and pain in her chest made Aurelia feel sour and slender. My fingers had curled up before I knew it, and my little fists were clenched. She didn't understand why her fiancé, who was usually gentle and gentleman, and who had sworn to protect her for the rest of her life, became like this. From the corner of his wet eyes, he saw Ron's figure. Completely opposite to his fiancé's irritability, Ron stood quietly in the middle of the crowd just like before. He only joined the Eternal Freedom sect because of some unavoidable reasons. He endured the erosion and torment of his obsession with potions, and was unwilling to harm himself. Although he said some very extreme things, it was just to reassure her that he would really not hurt her. He was willing to apologize for the fear she endured, even though it was not his fault, and he even risked punishment by releasing her after Herman and the Dawn Knight arrived, because he knew that when the Dawn Knight arrived, she would it's safe. In comparison, her fiancé. Beep. The system prompts that Aurelia's favorability towards you has increased by 10. The current favorability towards you is 40, which is a level of friendship. The system prompt woke Ron up. He glanced at Aurelia and Herman and roughly understood what happened between them. For a moment, Ron even felt funny. What does this mean? Aurelia's favorability towards him keeps rising even though he has done nothing. Does this guy have any special hobbies? Are you trying your best to send your fiancé to someone else? However, Herman's expression looks so happy now. Ron likes to see Herman's expression where he wants to kill him, but there is nothing he can do about it. After a long time, Ron withdrew his gaze and raised his right hand. The light movement immediately made many Dawn Knights tense up. They didn't even dare to leave here. There were obviously hundreds of knights, but before Ron spoke, they didn't even dare to say anything. A little sound. The strength shown by Ron made these knights deeply afraid. Any slight movement could stimulate their extremely sensitive nerves. But Ron just raised his right hand and grabbed his chin, falling into thought again. In the previous system prompt, the first two rows were completely garbled. What exactly does the system want to convey? Interference. Who interfered with the system? What kind of existence is a repairman? Ron would never be stupid enough to regard a repairman as an ordinary worker. Ordinary workers have no ability to repair the world line. Now that the world line has been repaired, doesn't it mean that Ron will still die here after all? After all, he won't have much of a role in the future world. Facing the world line that has been renovated, the experience he has mastered, I don't know how effective it can be. He tried to change his destiny against nature, but some beings wanted to kill him. Interesting. For a long time, Ron cast his gaze downwards. I don't know if this counts as opening the strategy system. I especially remember that there was once a boss named Van who captured 38 handsome or tall and mighty men in the game. There was also a player who took down 69 wives and was praised for having the character of Cao Wei. The 4 strategy tasks jump directly from 3 to 13, which means there are still 9 tasks that have not been activated in the middle. Ron's eyes stopped on 3 names: Aurelia, Ariana, Dolores. The 3 main heroines in the first plot. Regardless of figure, appearance or strength, she is a very outstanding woman. It is self-evidently difficult to win over such an outstanding woman, but the sense of accomplishment after a successful strategy is also the strongest. There is another advantage for Ron. He has successfully captured these 3 women in the game. He is familiar with their personalities and preferences, and knows what these 3 women will experience and encounter. Aurelia has a gentle personality, but she has a persistence in her heart. Once you get Aurelia's true love, she will tell you what it means to be loyal until death. Although Ariana has a quiet name, her identity is the chief Valkyrie of the Kingdom of Granville. She can almost be said to be the most powerful woman in the entire kingdom, with a fiery personality. Ron didn't like tigresses, except white ones. Dolores, the eldest princess of the Kingdom of Granville. When the mainland was in chaos and war could break out at any time, it was Dolores who single-handedly suppressed many nobles and strengthened the kingdom's military strength. One sentence. If the money is not used for military training, should it be used as compensation for defeat? Ron appreciated it very much. At the same time, she is still an out-and-out shaker. I heard that anyone who shakes an S has a heart that shakes an M. I don't know if this is true. It is barely acceptable to conquer these 3 Rons, but what the hell is the conquering system? When will the system be able to be conquered? If it were the original cold system, Ron wouldn't be interested in it at all. But if it's a system that now has a new skin, Ron really has the urge to dye the system with his own color. The corners of his mouth curved slightly, and this game finally started to become interesting. However, there is still a question in Ron's mind, that is, what does conquering these mean to him? What do the holy heart, the heroic heart, the noble heart, and the eternal heart mean? What is a door? Could it be said to be the door back to Earth? Ron's eyes suddenly brightened. He really didn't want to be trapped in this game forever. If he can return to Earth, can he avoid his inevitable death in the world that has been repaired? At this moment, the usual indifferent voice suddenly sounded in Ron's ears. Beep. The infinite death system is activated. Task description. Someone has a strong intention to kill you. The strength you have shown makes him deeply jealous. He tries to defeat you, kill you and replace you. How are you going to make a choice? First, run away. Running away is not cowardly. In some cases, it is a sign of wisdom. Task reward. Increase the agility attribute by 3 points. Second, go on a killing spree, with rivers of blood flowing. Prove your strength with blood. Task reward. Calculated based on the number of enemies killed. Countdown to death, 360 seconds. Ron exhaled slightly, with a bright smile on his face. He discovered another function of the system. Death warning, Don Farouk, the second largest role in the Larnaca City branch of the Eternal Freedom sect. This is a very handsome man, and this kind of believer is very popular in the sect. But now, that handsome face was extremely gloomy. With 1-star panic level strength, he was originally the most powerful candidate for the branch leader. Being usurped by the airborne Ron for the leader's position made Farouk dissatisfied, but he still had the capital to be proud. That is, he is stronger than Ron, but now even this last pride has been ruthlessly shattered by Ron. The previous contempt for Ron seemed to have turned into Ron's deliberate fooling of himself, which made him feel more and more irritable. Seeing Ron standing quietly in front, unsuspectingly giving his back to him. A strong urge to sneak attack from behind emerged in Farouk's chest. If we take action now, we should be 100% sure that we can capture Ron, right? Even if Ron can't be killed directly, at least he can be seriously injured. What the Eternal Freedom Sect advocates is absolute freedom. So, get started, what are you waiting for? Isn't this the best opportunity? Herman hates Ron. Once he takes action, the Knight Captain will immediately become his comrade in arms. All members of the entire branch are his younger brothers, and those Dawn Knights will also join Herman in besieging Ron. He and Herman, hundreds of younger brothers, hundreds of Dawn Knights, each of them could drown Ron with a drop of spit. No matter how you look at it, I have the advantage in this wave and there is absolutely no way I will lose. Once this thought emerged, he could no longer control it. Farouk's mind was constantly searching for conditions that would benefit him, and his breathing began to become rapid and hot. His right hand has been raised, and magic power is flowing within his body. Don Farouk had no idea that in Ron's eyes, he was like a clown on the stage. Don Farouk did not bombard Ron with powerful magic. After all, Ron was a magician, and excessively powerful magic fluctuations would definitely attract Ron's attention. He spread the magic power evenly throughout his body and chose to use magic power to strengthen his body. Strengthen, strengthen, strengthen. The magic power of the earth attribute is gathering rapidly, and a rock yellow luster appears on each rough finger. They are obviously human fingers, but they look harder than stone. The originally chattering voice disappeared. The believers behind Don Farouk all held their breath and remained motionless. The Knights of Dawn on the opposite side also looked like sculptures. The entire scene showed an oppressive silence. Farouk wants Ron to die. The believers of the Eternal Freedom Sect branch who are attached to Farouk want Ron to die, and the Knights of Dawn also want Ron to die. Herman, who had been staring at Ron, his eyes were widened to the extreme, and he was a vivid interpretation of what it meant to have splitting eyes. His mouth even opened uncontrollably, revealing a mouth full of blood. Everyone wants Ron to die, as if, as long as Ron dies, everyone will be happy immediately. In just a few seconds, the magic power has been gathered to the limit, and Don Farouk's right hand has even begun to shine with a metallic luster. The next second, his feet suddenly exerted force on the ground. With a bang, there seemed to be a bomb exploding under his feet. Farouk's body was ejected forward like a cannonball. His speed directly increased to the limit in a short distance and time, like a stream of light, flying past the ground. The clenched fist went straight to the back of Ron's heart. At this moment, countless pairs of eyes were staring at Farouk's fist, looking forward to the outcome. Especially Herman, whose face was distorted like a fierce ghost, and his lips moved quickly. Die, 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 die. Herman's abnormality finally caught Aurelia's attention. The sad nun subconsciously raised her head and followed Herman's gaze. Then, her face suddenly turned pale, and she instinctively screamed, "Be careful." In the entire scene, Aurelia was probably the only person who didn't want Ron to die. Unfortunately, it's too late. In an instant, the highly enhanced iron fist was attached to the back of Ron's heart, as if Ron's heart would be shattered into pieces in the next moment. A mere magician's weak body would never be able to withstand such a violent impact. He is dead. But just when everyone thought Ron was dead and his heart was about to be shattered, an extremely strange scene occurred. At that moment, Ron seemed to have turned into a mollusk. His upper body tilted to the left in a weird way, narrowly avoiding Don Farouk's iron fist. The iron fist hit the empty space, and the strong distortion made Farouk depressed and wanted to vomit blood. His face was full of astonishment, he couldn't believe the ending. From a close distance, he could see it more clearly than anyone else. It was an action that normal humans could not do. Extreme dodge. Fully enhanced shoes have a special effect that can only be used once per day. With this ability, Ron doesn't have to worry about Don Farouk's sneak attack. Under the influence of inertia, Don Farouk's body continued to rush forward. The moment he passed by Ron, Farouk saw Ron, who was turning around, with a smile on his handsome face and a dark smile. The pupils stared into his eyes. Hiss. A gust of cold air rushed directly from the soles of my feet to my forehead. Several slender fingers appeared from an incredible angle and clasped his forehead. It felt like he was actively delivering his head into Ron's palm. Die. Crack. The hard skull cracked instantly. Like a watermelon hit by a hammer, a mixture of scarlet red and thick white gel spattered on Ron's robe. Balls, strips, and lumps fell along Ron's clothes. Ron didn't give Don Farouk a chance to say another word. Even though the other person's life was already in his hands, he didn't get carried away by the pleasure. He would not give Don Farouk the opportunity to speak and provoke hundreds of followers of the Eternal Freedom sect. Once there is a full-scale conflict between him and these believers, Herman will naturally not miss this golden opportunity given his hatred for him. Herman will forcefully order 500 Dawn Knights to participate in the encirclement and suppression. At that time, he will have to face the huge force of hundreds of believers and 500 Dawn Knights. According to the system's calculations, this force has the ability to kill him within 6 minutes. It took Ron a few seconds to judge the situation he was in before using thunderous means to kill Don Farouk. Only in this way could he shock the entire audience. The scene, which had been getting hot, dropped to freezing point again. Seeing Don Farouk's head crushed by Ron, leaving only a headless body on the ground, twitching nervously, everyone remained silent. No one could have imagined that it would end like this. How strong is this guy? What level is his strength? Panic level, disaster level, even hero level. As a magician, he never even used any magic from beginning to end. The unknown is even more frightening. He looked down at his right hand, and saw that some sticky fluid was dripping down his fingertips. Can you imagine what it feels like to crush a raw egg with your hands? That's roughly what Ron looks like now. He exhaled, feeling a little nauseous, and reached into his pocket with his left hand. In his short memory, there was a pure white square handkerchief in the pocket here. However, when Ron's fingers first reached in, the first thing he touched was not the soft touch of the cotton handkerchief. Instead, it's a bit matte and rough. Ron took this thing out of his pocket. It was a crumpled piece of paper. With a little curiosity, Ron shook the paper ball away with one hand. The memory of knowledge made the words on the paper quickly become familiar. The scarlet, worm-like twisted words were filled with an aura of madness, like some kind of weird prophecy. You'll kill everyone, including yourself. Hiss. Ron's pupils suddenly shrank, and indescribable fear came over his heart, as if his body was covered with caterpillars, and all his skin was covered with fine goosebumps. Ron almost used up all his willpower to control his limbs without showing the sudden shock in his heart. He silently stuffed the paper ball back into his pocket, and took out a pure white square handkerchief from deeper with his fingers. Wiping every finger on his right hand. The filth is cleaned up. On the index finger of his right hand, there was obviously a rough, unhealed wound, as if it had been bitten open by teeth. The words on the paper were written with blood by the original owner of this body, biting his fingers. But why do you use me? Could it be that this was a message from the original Ron to himself? Why, he couldn't have known that he would time travel to his body. But if it's not a message for yourself, then who is it for? Ron exhaled slowly to calm the surging waves in his chest. The handkerchief, which had been stained by filth, was discarded by Ron, and it happened to fall on Farouk's broken head. The scarlet color quickly soaked into the handkerchief, turning pure white into scarlet. Under the moonlight, it became even more dazzling. Ron's eyes flickered a few times. This note gave him too much impact and too many doubts, but he knew very well that now was not the time to think about these issues. He raised his head, his eyes had become cold, and his gaze swept across. Whether it was the believers of the Eternal Freedom sect or the Knights of Dawn, they all lowered their heads. They did not even have the courage to look at Ron. I had been so eagerly looking forward to Ron's death in my heart, but now I was so fearful in my heart. Even Herman lowered his proud head and bit his lip with his incomplete teeth. He didn't know whether it was because his lips were bitten or because of the blood from his broken teeth. There were traces of bright red falling from the corners of his mouth. From heaven to hell, it's nothing more than that. In the entire scene, only Aurelia was really grateful for Ron's survival, and her originally pale face turned slightly flushed. No one could see that a pair of slender arms as white as lotus roots appeared silently from behind Ron, with green-white fingers crossed on Ron's chest and wrapped around Ron's neck. With her small and pointed chin resting on Ron's shoulder, Ron could see her beautiful and delicate side face, and her silvery white and jet black hair fluttering in Ron's ears. System, black and white, light and dark. What's more, no one noticed that a strand of silk thread, thinner than a spider's silk and almost invisible to the naked eye, floated up from the pool of blood and was silently absorbed by the system. Even Ron didn't notice that her eyes seemed to be shining with a faint light. The change in the system only lasted for a short moment, and soon returned to normal. It was as indifferent as before, as if a superior god was overlooking all living beings. There was dead silence all around, no sound at all. Ron wiped his fingers and looked at the other believers. These believers were horrified and their scalps were numb. Just now, they watched Don Farouk sneak up on Ron. Not only did they not warn him, they even expected Ron to be killed. If Ron was seriously injured, they would not hesitate to rush forward and besiege him. And now, the time of reckoning has arrived. From the way Ron wiped his fingers with ease after crushing Farouk's head, it can be seen that this guy is definitely not a kind person, and he will not have any psychological burden for killing people. The anxious suffering lasted for a long time. Finally, Ron spoke slowly. Everyone, you wouldn't do something like Don Farouk who tried to kill a superior, right? Many believers were stunned for a moment, and one person reacted the fastest. He immediately said, of course not. You are the highest officer of the branch, and all power here should be under your control. Other believers also reacted. Although they didn't know why, Ron didn't seem to have any intention of being involved. This gave them hope of living, and everyone quickly began to agree. You are the highest officer directly appointed by the headquarters, and no one can shake your authority. Farouk, this despicable and shameless, did such crazy things as sneak attack on the superior for the sake of power. A believer was filled with righteous indignation and resolutely drew a clear line with Farouk. Farouk and I are incompatible. What we want to stop is that our strength is limited. Farouk's action just now was too fast, and there was no chance at all. Fortunately, Mr. Ron, your strength is amazing, far beyond what a fool like Farouk can match. Sir, you are kind-hearted and gave Farouk the most merciful way to die. If it were me, another believer looked at Farouk's headless body, his eyes filled with anger, which seemed to be similar to Farouk's. Kay had the hatred of killing his father and seizing his wife, and he wished he could cut Farouk into pieces with thousands of knives, crushing his bones and scattering ashes. Although Farouk was their eldest brother before, the eldest brother is dead, so there should be no problem with stepping on both sides, right? They had previously attached themselves to Farouk purely because of Farouk's strength and status. This did not mean that they had much loyalty to Farouk. The most important thing now is how to win Ron's favor. With a warm smile on his face, Ron clapped his hands and praised, I really did not misjudge you. You are all the most loyal servants of the God of eternal freedom. As soon as these words came out, many believers breathed a sigh of relief. There was no doubt that the Supreme Leader had forgiven them. That's right, Ron didn't intend to go on a killing spree. Although according to the system tasks, the more you kill, the more rewards you get. However, Ron remained calm throughout. He will not be dazzled by future rewards. Once he takes action against these believers, Herman, a madman, will definitely force 500 Dawn Knights to participate in the encirclement and suppression. Ron turned to look at the Knights of Dawn. Everyone, what happened today was just a misunderstanding. We have no intention of conflict with the Church of the Dawn Goddess. Why don't we just let it go? What do you think? Herman's face was livid, and he subconsciously wanted to refuse, but before he could speak, Herman's adjutant had already taken a step forward. Of course, distinguished sir, we agree with your proposal. Although the Church of the Goddess of Dawn has been trying to eradicate all cults, this adjutant obviously does not want to lead his men to death. It is better to leave this matter to his superiors. After greeting Ron again, the adjutant led the Dawn Knights away. Ron walked towards Aurelia. Seeing Ron approaching, Aurelia was no longer as frightened as she was at first. Her pretty little face forced a smile, but her beautiful eyes were still more filled with sadness and confusion about her fiancé's rough treatment of her. There was shock at Ron's display of strength. After all, she couldn't help the doubts in her heart, and her lips parted lightly. Who are you? Ron spread his hands. He's just an ancient writing scholar kidnapped by the Eternal Freedom sect. Although it sounds like I'm defending, what happened here was not my intention. I was forced to do it. I'm sorry for the harm you suffered. Aurelia smiled and shook her head. That's not your fault. Ron was not a die-hard cultist, which was strangely reassuring to her. Pursing her lips, Aurelia asked, what are you going to do next? Ron turned his head and glanced at the believers behind him. I will find a way to leave the eternal free church, although it is not easy. After a brief pause, Ron lowered his voice again. By the way, Miss Aurelia, after you return to the Church of the Goddess of Dawn, you can ask the nun to verify your purity. Believe me, as long as you are pure, your fiancé will come back to you. That's weird. Ron showed a bit of cunning. If you want to conquer Aurelia, there is no point in continuing to belittle Herman at this time. This is a woman with deep feelings. She will not look back unless she is bruised and bruised. If she talks too much, she may even arouse Aurelia's disgust. In this case, it is better to do the opposite. Aurelia's eyes shrank, her white teeth bit her lip gently, and she looked at Ron with a somewhat complicated look. She didn't expect that when her fiancé treated her roughly and the Templars abandoned her, she would be the original one. Ron, the villain, is still thinking about himself, and even wants to help restore the relationship between her and her fiancé. There was a ray of emotion in my heart. On the other side, seeing Aurelia and Ron whispering together, Herman was filled with jealousy. He couldn't hear what the two were talking about, but the intimacy made him irritated. Okay, Aurelia, this little fool, doesn't even shy away from taboos now, right? Why didn't I realize this woman was so shameless before? You dare to be so intimate in front of your fiancé, and you don't know how nasty things will happen out of sight. With resentment in his heart, Herman limped and prepared to leave. Otherwise, he could not beat him again and again. Seeing Herman leave, Aurelia took a deep breath and nodded slightly to Ron. Thank you, I'm leaving. Seeing him limping, Aurelia felt a little distressed. Although Herman's previous rudeness made her very sad, the relationship that lasted for more than 10 years did not dissipate so easily. She activated her magic power and prepared to use the healing spell. Feeling the fluctuation of magic power around him, Herman turned his head suddenly, his twisted face like an angry lion. Go away, you don't need to be pretentious. Looking at Aurelia's pretty face, Herman felt disgusted for no reason. He raised his right hand and slapped Aurelia's pretty face. Aurelia's heart trembled, but she did not escape after all. But before the slap could touch Aurelia's face, her wrist was already grabbed. It's Ron. At this moment, Ron was like a perfect and impeccable gentleman. Mr. Herman, hitting a woman is not a good habit. Beep. The system prompts that Aurelia's favorability towards you has increased by 10, and the current favorability towards you is 50. Herman glanced at Ron and Aurelia indifferently. Aurelia, starting from today, the engagement between you and me is void. After saying a few words and forcefully shaking off Ron's fingers, Herman left without looking back. Aurelia's face suddenly turned pale, her body felt as if she had been hit hard, her legs weakened, and she almost fell. As I said, Aurelia has a very strong stubbornness in her nature, and she is extremely serious about relationships. Even if Herman's attitude was extremely rude, Aurelia never thought of giving up. She, Aurelia, is not unwanted. In recent years, some men who are more handsome, have bigger backgrounds, and are more powerful than Herman have shown love to her, but Aurelia has rejected them all, because in her heart, she always puts herself in the position of Herman's fiancé. She firmly guards her chastity. As a nun with a beauty that is not in line with her own strength, it is not easy to keep her chastity in this increasingly filthy and dirty church. She just wanted to wait until her wedding night and give her most precious everything to her husband. But now, the happiness she expected was crushed by her fiancé's own hands. All persistence lost its meaning at this time. Ron tried to comfort, but didn't know what to say. He accidentally saw Aurelia's eyes, as beautiful as amber, losing all their luster at that moment. All that's left is darkness and emptiness. Like a beautiful doll. Ron was shocked. What's going on? Still remember, in the game, it seems that this happens when Aurelia is on the verge of despair, collapse, and her bloodline is about to awaken, right? He clearly didn't harm Aurelia, so why did Aurelia's bloodline awakening even advance? At this moment, Aurelia raised her head and stared at Ron with her dull eyes. The corners of her slightly raised mouth were filled with a touch of sarcasm, teasing, and a hint of madness. She stretched out a hand to caress Ron's cheek. Compared to other people, she does not dislike this man. Mr. Ron, do you want to take away my purity? Do you want to take away my purity? Do you want to be so direct? Ron was startled when he suddenly heard such powerful words from Aurelia and almost squirted. Could this be the effect of world line constriction? Destined to do so, he must fall in love with Aurelia. Is this world line a little too weird? The believers around him were even more stunned. They felt that their rank was simply too weak. Although the physical pleasure and indulgence were intoxicating, compared with the top officers, they were not on the same level at all. What is this? Tenderness before parting. These believers know that this supreme leader was a very decent scholar before this, and he may not be used to being surrounded by people when he is happy. One by one, they took the initiative to exit the yard, leaving this huge place to Ron and Aurelia. Ron was stunned, and the confusion in his mind prevented him from answering immediately. At this moment, Aurelia seemed to be deeply stimulated by Herman's break off of the engagement, causing the originally pure nun to slip to the other extreme. It's not that I can't understand it. She experienced the fear of being tainted and the excitement of escaping from death. Her life experienced great ups and downs in this short period of time. She wanted to confide in her fiancé's arms the pain and despair she had experienced during this period, but she never thought that her fiancé had not given her any comfort at all. It was clear that she had done nothing wrong, her body was still pure, and she was the victim, but her fiancé's distrust, rough treatment, abuse, beatings, and even the immediate termination of the engagement. A series of blows in a short period of time pushed Aurelia directly into the abyss of despair. It even made Aurelia feel that the things she had persisted in for more than 10 years and worked hard to protect for more than 10 years were a complete joke. Since Herman felt that she had lost her virginity and abandoned her, then, what's the harm if she really gave her virginity to this man who didn't hate her? Aurelia didn't know what she was doing. Was it an indulgence after a long period of suppression, or was it revenge after being hurt by Herman? Aurelia just wanted something to fill the hole in her heart. Maybe she really has gone crazy. Seeing that Ron remained stunned, Aurelia took the initiative to grab Ron's hand and put it on her chest. Heart-warming warmth. The temperature was not exaggerated, but it made Ron feel the heat. Buzz. There seemed to be a flame burning in his body, and the infatuation potion that he had finally suppressed with a strong will seemed to be showing signs of taking effect again. Ron's throat kept moving, and his breathing became rapid. Mr. Ron, the effects of the potion must be very uncomfortable. If you really want to break away from the eternal free church, it's best not to have too many entanglements with the women of this church. However, if the effect of the potion is not cleared up, you may feel uncomfortable for a long time, so if you wish, I can help you. Aurelia still had a weird and mocking smile on her lips. It seemed as if he was laughing at Herman, and at the same time he seemed to be laughing at himself. She even developed a strong sense of self-loathing. Even though Ron was the only person who truly cared about her, she used Ron as a tool to vent her inner anguish. Guilt racked her soul and she couldn't control her movements. Slender fingers slid down Ron's cheeks, and his fingertips swept across his neck, chest. Could it be that Mr. Ron still insists that even if the world is destroyed, he will not touch a finger on me? I am still somewhat confident in my body, so it shouldn't be that bad. Aurelia said. Ron smiled bitterly. Aurelia shows another extreme, releasing her charm as a woman to the extreme, exuding crazy charm in every move she makes. Ron even doubted, was this really the white saint of the future? Rather, more like a witch. Ron could feel the throbbing in his chest. His hand seemed to be attracted by a magnet and landed on Aurelia's heart, unable to move away at all. Indulge yourself, go crazy. But, if this was really a trap created by world-line convergence, wouldn't he just jump into the trap? Moreover, judging from the process of conquering Aurelia in the game, if you choose to accept it at this time, although you can have a kiss, if you want to completely conquer Aurelia, you will basically fail. The tasks released by the system, complete guide, should not only be as simple as getting Aurelia's first blood. Finally, Ron relied on his strong will to resist the temptation of gravity and pushed Aurelia away a little. In an instant, Ron could see that Aurelia's already empty eyes became darker and darker, as if the last life was about to disappear. Is this the real trap? Ron took a deep breath. He didn't have much time to think. He grabbed Aurelia's shoulders and forced her to look directly into his eyes. Miss Aurelia, don't doubt it, you are very charming. I believe that no man can remain indifferent when facing you. I also want to have some deeper communication with you, but not in your current state. I want more than just your body. I can roughly understand what you are thinking now, but Miss Aurelia, Herman's abandonment of you is not the reason for you to torture yourself. Aurelia looked at Ron blankly. Compared to her fiancé, whom she had been with for more than 10 years, this man whom she had been afraid of cared more about herself. There was actually a hint of light in the amber eyes. Beep, the system prompts that Aurelia's favorability towards you has increased by 10. The current favorability towards you is 60, which is a level of intimacy. In the intimacy and favorability stage, you can already make some special requests to the opposite gender, such as kissing and physical contact. If the method is clever enough, it is not impossible to have love. After a long while, Aurelia burst into laughter. Ha, you are really a cunning man. I find that I really like you a little bit. But, don't you really think about it? If you miss this opportunity, it will be gone. Aurelia blinked, tilted her head and looked at Ron. Goblin. Aurelia seems to have recovered a little, but not completely. At this moment, Aurelia is still on the verge of collapse. Ron smiled and said, "Go back, Aurelia, and tell everything to the church. If your situation has not changed after proving your innocence, then I hope to get your invitation again. I promise, next time, I will never refuse." Aurelia's eyes dropped, and she didn't know what she was thinking about. After a few seconds, she suddenly raised her head, looked at Ron, and took a step forward, her beautiful cheek almost touching Ron's chest. Ron took a step back as the fragrant wind hit him. "What about you? There is always a way to endure it." Ron shrugged, and if it didn't work out, he would return to his old profession. He has been a craftsman for more than 10 years, and his skills have not yet fallen off. That's it. She suddenly stretched out her hand and pushed on Ron's chest. Unexpectedly, Ron's body fell to the ground on his back. Immediately afterwards, Aurelia was seen lifting her right leg, and the torn hem of the nun's uniform slid down her delicate long legs. The white and greasy skin is shining with a frost-like luster, and the curves are beautiful, like the most exquisite work of art. She bent her slender waist and took off her cloth boots and socks, revealing her white porcelain feet. The magic flow caused a ball of water to wrap around her little feet. The slowly surging water slides through every gap in the jade feet. When the clear water dispersed, only some water drops were left hanging on the instep and toes, like crystal clear dewdrops on the petals. It is obviously a picture full of temptation, but it is filled with indescribable holiness. The 500 Dawn Knights didn't care about her, and her fiancé didn't care about her. Now Aurelia just wanted to help the only person who cared about her solve his troubles. She needed some stimulation to soothe the pain in her chest. Amber eyes looked at Ron, her lips parted slightly. "Do you want me to help you?" Aurelia's little feet are really beautiful. The round instep is like smooth white jade, and the exquisite toes are like freshly peeled grapes. Ron must make it clear that he is really not a football player. He doesn't like to be stepped on. Anyone who likes to be stepped on must be a pervert. Although Aurelia's jade feet are really beautiful, the toes and soles of the feet are connected to the ankles, forming a seductive and psychedelic arc. Call. At this moment, there was only one thought left in Ron's mind. This guy Herman is truly the best wingman, the strongest supporter, and one of a kind. Ron likes to be proactive, but he also doesn't dislike being passive. It was obvious that Aurelia had no experience. But Ron's clumsy movements still brought strong stimulation. He thanked Herman in his heart. This was all due to Herman. In fact, after traveling here, his contact with Aurelia was very brief. It could even be said to be the beginning of a collapse of heaven. Even if there were some twists later, it would definitely not be much. What he said to Aurelia was even more. There are very few, but with Herman's background, Aurelia's favorability towards him has been soaring. Ron was even more glad that he didn't kill Herman. This guy would continue to provide assists until he completely defeated Aurelia. Hiss. Who? Ron made a strange sound from his mouth, and he looked at Aurelia. The holiness of the nun and the temptation of the witch were perfectly integrated in Aurelia. Listening to Ron's voice, Aurelia became even gentler. Sneeze. On Bruno Street in the early morning, the sun has not yet fully risen, and the sky is gray and somewhat depressing. But for the lower class poor living here, the day has begun. Both sides of the street are crowded with disorderly, low-rise and dilapidated houses. The dirty air is mixed with various sounds. People come and go in shabby clothes, with numb expressions like puppets. The permeating smell of corruption made Herman frown slightly as he left the courtyard and returned to the church. He didn't like this place. This place was not worthy of his status. He seemed to be irritated by this smell and sneezed violently. Herman touched the back of his neck inexplicably. He always felt a little cold on the back of his neck. Who the one was saying bad things about me behind my back? The sky has turned a layer of fish belly white, and the night is about to pass. The temperature in the early morning was the lowest, a cold wind blew by, and something fell on my head. Herman stretched out his hand and fumbled around. It was a green leaf, green and shiny. The leaves that should not be falling at this moment are withering at this moment. It's like a sign. He threw the leaves away casually, feeling a little irritable. Looking back, the previous attitude toward Aurelia seemed a bit too bad. After all, Aurelia was kidnapped. In other words, Aurelia was just a simple victim. However, when he thought about it, his fiancée was kidnapped by the Eternal Freedom Sect, and was treated like this and that by that Ron. All kinds of difficult actions appeared uncontrollably in Herman's mind. As his fiancé, he also lost face because of this. From then on, he would inevitably become the laughingstock of many clergymen and nobles. The slight guilt in Herman's heart suddenly disappeared. All that's left is unquenchable hatred. His face became more and more ferocious, and his eyes were filled with scarlet bloodshot eyes. Why did this swallow her tongue and kill herself the moment she was no longer caught? She should die to protect his dignity. As for Ron, he must die. Herman quickened his pace. He wanted to call stronger reinforcements from the church branch. Only by killing Ron completely could the resentment in his heart be relieved. The hat that has been stuck on his head can be taken off a little. As for Aurelia, although she has lost her virginity, she still looks good and has a good figure. She is no longer qualified to be his wife, but she can still be a lover. Being able to become his mistress is already a great honor for Aurelia. This is his tolerance for her. The effect of the magic potion has been released a little. In the yard, Aurelia has rearranged her clothes, shoes and socks. Her expression is no longer crazy, but has returned to calmness and indifference, as if the madness just now has really released some of the pressure. The scent of flowers wafts in the air. The amber eyes were no longer as empty as before, looking at Ron, who was also sorting out his clothes. The silence around her was a little unbearable for Aurelia. Don't you have anything to say? What do you want to say? Ron raised his eyebrows. Next time, can you put on a pair of stockings? Call. Aurelia was discouraged for a while. Such an answer was something she never expected. A few seconds passed, and Aurelia glanced at Ron quietly. Do you like stockings? I like. Ron shrugged. You know, I am a very philanthropic person. I like stockings, but I don't just like stockings. I just want to experience a different feeling, do you understand? Aurelia exhaled helplessly. I just realized that you were really a fool. Thank you for the compliment, Ron said indifferently. After all, the character he plays is a villain. Aurelia was speechless. Who praised you? Don't even think about a next time. Just dream, there won't be a second time. Ron didn't care. This kind of thing happened once or twice, so he wasn't in a hurry. After a pause, Aurelia looked at Ron again, biting her lower lip with her white teeth. I'm leaving, Aurelia said. Ron nodded. The silent courtyard was filled with unbearable embarrassment. Ron was helpless. It would be better if Herman was here. As long as Herman was here, the atmosphere would never be so bad. This very talented guy will definitely think of some way to stimulate Aurelia, so that Aurelia's favorability towards him will increase again. Although it might be a little cruel for Herman to watch his fiancée serve him with his own eyes, it might also be quite exciting. As Ron watched, Aurelia left. In the shoes, it feels a little bad. As soon as she arrived at Bruno Street, in a deserted place, Aurelia could no longer control herself. She squatted down suddenly and covered her face with her hands. Blush spread down her neck and covered her cheeks. Even her ears were red. It was as if steam was rising above my head. Oh, here comes the goddess of dawn. She must be crazy, otherwise, how could she do such a blasphemous act? It was fine before, but after it was over, a strong sense of shame suddenly came up. Aurelia also didn't expect that the scene between a nun and a priest that she inadvertently saw would be so shameful in reality. Ouch! A very beautiful cry came from his mouth. Aurelia, you are really a madman. Ron also let out a breath and glanced at the sky. Night had passed. He turned back to the room and found the followers of the Eternal Freedom sect. These believers are all very well behaved. They stay in the room and don't even dare to take a peek. They don't know how fierce the battle is happening outside, but they can tell it from the expression on Ron's face. The beautiful nun made the Supreme Leader very satisfied. As expected of Master Ron, he is so powerful that he can control that little nun very well. Ignoring the atmosphere around him that was about to start boasting mode, Ron pondered for a moment and said, "Everyone, our stronghold has been discovered by the Church of the Dawn Goddess, and it is no longer safe here. You can leave first, and you can go to other nearby branches. Department, I don't think they will refuse." Many believers were stunned for a moment, and one of them boldly asked, "Sir, what about you?" "I need to stay temporarily to deal with the next thing, don't worry." Under Ron's kind words and persuasion, all these believers left. After sending these people away, Ron was not in a hurry to leave. He studied the system and found that except for a few more functions, it was not much different from the original one. An extra set of skins only makes the system look more pleasing to the eye. The rewards for the mission have been distributed. He only killed Don Farouk, but this person was the leader, and the reward was that his strength was upgraded from the original extraordinary 1 star to the extraordinary 2 stars. Although he is still a weakling, Ron is quite satisfied. After all, apart from the equipment, this is the power that truly belongs to him. In fact, in Ron's view, Herman and Don Farouk were both in the dilemma he faced when he first traveled to this world. Only by breaking this situation could he truly gain a temporary foothold in this world. The function of the system is to issue death warnings and survive the death crisis so that he can become stronger. In order to become stronger, should I take the initiative to commit suicide? Perhaps, it can be called an infinite death-seeking system. Forget it, it's not necessary. What if you accidentally lose it and die? Besides, he is a little villain, why would he be so strong? Hey, do you have any other functions? Ron said abruptly, trying to chat with the system. But unfortunately, except when the task is released, the system has no sound at all, and there is no communication with Ron at all. Ron was not discouraged and said to himself, "Hey, by the way, I can't keep asking you to come, right? How about I give you a name? Your skin is black and white, light and dark. What do you think about calling you Heitzi? Little Heitzi." Ron felt that this name was actually quite appropriate. The system didn't answer, it just floated in the air, silently watching Ron with the same, no, even more indifferent eyes as before. The look in his eyes made Ron feel a little guilty, and he smiled dryly, "If you don't like it, forget it. Then let's call you Elsa." The system seemed to be quite satisfied with the name. It turned away and ignored Ron. I don't know if it was Ron's illusion. I always felt that the system seemed a little more agile than before. Like, a little bit of humanity. Immediately Ron burst into laughter, even if this system could be conquered. But the system was just a system after all. Birth of humanity. Impossible, absolutely impossible. Elsa is really just an image evolved by the system. Her graceful figure is completely unaffected by gravity. Her body falls lightly on Ron's shoulders. Even if her seemingly round buttocks sits on Ron's shoulders, it is completely nothing tactile. A pair of white calves swayed gently on Ron's chest, and a section of delicate skin above the knees even touched Ron's cheek from time to time. "Hey, I'm wearing a model," Ron complained in his heart. Ron had already been thinking about what to do next and how to live in this world. Although he is a villain, this does not mean that Ron will always exist in this world as a believer of the sect. Believers of the evil god will never end well, Ron knew this very well. Most importantly, the sect has one rule, and that is, sharing. Sharing is even more exaggerated than sharing bikes. Ron would never accept this rule no matter what. With Ron's current strength, it is basically impossible to leave the kingdom of Granville. Although the branches of the sect look rubbish, it does not mean that the sect as a whole is rubbish. The Eternal Freedom sect can silently erode the entire kingdom. No, it is the northern continent. Without enough ability, it will never be able to do this. The Larnaca City branch is just a small stronghold of the sect that cannot be smaller. Arranging Ron here actually had the purpose of not wanting to attract too many people's attention. Unfortunately, the brilliant minds of the branch directly captured Aurelia in order to complete Ron's initiation ceremony, which caused a lot of attention. A series of troubles. There are also 36 patrol envoys in the sect, each of whom is comparable in strength to the bishop of the Church of the Dawn Goddess. The 13 apostles are as powerful as the archbishop. As for the most mysterious four-pillar gods, their strength is even more unfathomable. Ron's own family knew about his own affairs. Although the enhanced equipment allowed him to crush Herman and crush Don Farouk's head, facing these truly strong men, his strength was not worth mentioning. If you want to survive under the threat of the sect, joining their arch-enemy, the Church of the Dawn Goddess, is naturally the best choice. The Church of the Goddess of Dawn is one of the 7 most orthodox churches in this worldview. Although the strength of each church is weaker than the other due to various reasons, until the last chapter, the Church of the Goddess of Dawn still exists. It is an ability in itself. Moreover, according to the plot of the game, Gerald, the Archbishop of the Church of the Dawn Goddess stationed in Larnaca City, is also a rare and decent character. He knew Ron's true identity and knew that killing Ron would cause a series of major impacts. The knowledge Ron mastered was also crucial to the Church of the Dawn Goddess. There were also many ancient classics in the Church of the Dawn Goddess that urgently needed to be interpreted. He was very dissatisfied and regretful that Herman chopped Ron into pulp. So now, if Ron has not destroyed Aurelia's chastity, Gerald may even come over to invite Ron in person. This is a pretty good opportunity to get rid of the sect. After taking a short rest, Ron stretched and turned to look at the houses. The weird reliefs on the wall are far more impactful than in the game. You can feel the indescribable evil just by looking at them. After a brief pause, Ron walked towards the front of a statue. He squatted down, reached out and knocked on the left side of the statue's foot. The bottom was empty. Snap! The hardcover version of the Dark Bible smashed the floor, strengthening the destructive power of Man 13's Dark Bible. It was even more exaggerated than a hammer. The gravel on the surface was wiped away, and a treasure chest was revealed inside. Finding every treasure chest in the game is the most basic quality for an RPG player. There are a total of 3 treasure chests in these rooms. For early game players, these 3 treasure chests are very important. There are 3 pieces of novice equipment, a handful of copper plates, and a few silver coins in the 3 treasure chests. He didn't have much money, and it didn't have much influence on Ron. Although he was a fool, he was still the son of a duke and a well-known scholar. Ron himself was not very short of money. Plus a magic book recording low-level magic water arrows. Beep. The system prompts, "Congratulations to the host for acquiring low-level magic, water archery." After Ron opened the magic book and carefully read every spell in it, the system prompt sounded at the right time. Looking at the slender water arrow flying out from his fingertips, Ron's face showed an innocent smile. There was no one else here, and Ron didn't need to pretend to be anything. Although it was only the lowest level of magic, Ron had a lot of fun playing it. After searching for the 3 treasure chests, Ron returned to the yard and groped around on the body of Don Farouk, whose head had been crushed. Touching corpses is also a basic quality for a player. There are a total of 312 gold coins in the storage ring. Oh, Don Farouk, you are such a fool, I really want to kick your ass with my boot, you have more money than me. This is a huge fortune, at least 5 times Ron's current net worth. Thinking that in the game, when there were no bugs at that time, he had to go through all the trouble to finally kill this guy, but the harvest was only a pitiful 7 silver coins, Ron sighed. As a matter of course, he put Don Farouk's storage ring on his hand, and strengthened it to 13 by the way. In the real world, there are no in-game restrictions at all. As long as he wants, he can wear rings on all 10 fingers and necklaces on his neck. Although he may look like a stupid upstart, he is absolutely safe. With this windfall, Ron felt even happier. Finally, he stopped in front of a door. This was the original Ron's study. He had gone in the game, but there was nothing special inside, except for some books. By some mistake, Ron opened the door. The room was empty, with only a table and a chair. The table was filled with various books, notebooks, and a turned-off magic lamp. A quill was placed on the parchment without even having time to put it away. During the research process, Ron was forcibly taken there to undergo the initiation ceremony. His fingers rubbed the paper on the table, and a comfortable touch came from the very finely polished parchment, which recorded some of Ron's research on ancient characters. What caught Ron's attention most was a rubbing, a mottled slate, and a notebook, brand new. He reached out and opened the notebook. On the first page, there were signs of being torn off. I took the piece of paper out of my pocket and compared it. The cracks matched perfectly. The piece of paper was torn from this notebook. "You will kill everyone, including yourself." These are the words left by the original owner of this body. Whenever he thought of the crimson and twisted words in blood, Ron could feel the coldness seeping into his bones. To whom did he leave this message? Why use you? Repeating these two questions in his mind, Ron looked at the next page. On the next page, there were 3 large words in the same scarlet color and the same distortion: "No more." Don't say anything more. You have to finish writing it. Don't you know that out of context is unethical? Chapter 11. Even more disturbing than the Riddler is the broken dog. The former Ron committed 2 original sins at once. Ron complained in his mind, but it was understandable. Just from the handwriting, it can be seen that when this string of words was left, the original owner of the body was on the verge of madness. He couldn't tell what kind of pressure the original owner had endured before he was replaced by him, which would lead to such madness. No more. Do you want to stop studying certain things or touching certain things? Or is he praying to some existence to stop torturing him? What is he afraid of? All kinds of complicated thoughts quickly grew in his mind, and Ron's mind was in chaos. He accepted the memory of the original owner, but it was mainly about common sense and knowledge, and little else. He opened the notebook and tried to find out more content from the back, but this was a brand new notebook and there were no traces left behind. He sighed. If he could find other notebooks and know what the original Ron had gone through, he might be able to understand what this sentence meant. Ron rummaged around on the desk and opened every notebook and parchment, but there was nothing in it that could be connected with the notebook. He looked for the storage ring again, but there was no relevant record in it. Perhaps Ron's previous notebook had been lost, or it might have been robbed when he was kidnapped by the Eternal Freedom sect. Ron shook his head. Although he had many doubts in his heart, Ron stopped thinking about this issue for the time being. He looked at the other 2 things on the table that attracted him. A rubbing, a stone slab full of decay and dilapidation. The rubbings are imprinted with the typical pattern of the Eternal Freedom sect, which is like a symbol of human reproductive organs. This is what the sect wants Ron to interpret. But there is no doubt that the original Ron was extremely disgusted with the Eternal Freedom sect. He did not even translate any word on the rubbings, but just threw them aside casually. On the contrary, the ancient and decayed slate was placed in the middle of the table. It could be seen that the original Ron attached great importance to this slate. He should have spent a lot of energy on this slate. The parchment next to it was filled with dense words, all records left by the original Ron. The stone slab is in an irregular square shape, with dense ghostly symbols on it, or patterns. These ancient characters are a series of symbols designed by the game company themselves. They are obscure and difficult to understand. It is said that there are nearly 2,000 such characters in total. A big player decrypted the game characters. At that time, Ron just glanced at them casually, but he was not very interested in them and did not pay too much attention. In comparison, he preferred some special CGs. So now that I got the slate, I still can't figure out the true meaning of these words, which makes Ron a little annoyed. Although the original Ron was quite accomplished in the study of ancient characters, this belonged to a long-lost civilization after all, and the difficulty of research can be imagined. Even if he completely inherited the knowledge-related memories of the original owner of the body, it would still be difficult. Only less than 1/10 of the writing on the slate can be recognized. Based on this, it is almost impossible to decipher the content on the slate. Looking at the slate, Ron suddenly had a strange thought in his mind. What I don't want is not to translate the rubbings, or to continue studying or even touch this slate. While he was thinking about it, unknowingly, his fingers had landed on the stone slab. He quickly wanted to pull his fingers away. At this moment, his mind suddenly became confused and he felt a certain kind of gaze. It seemed that a pair of mysterious eyes were staring at him from above. In an instant, a layer of fine pimples appeared on Ron's skin. The feeling was not strong, but it made Ron feel the fear of falling weightlessly. That sight, whose sight is it? He subconsciously raised his head, but all he could see in front of him was a thick, indestructible black Noisy murmurs began to echo in my ears, including the crackle of burning fire, the surging waves of the sea, like the wail of someone on the verge of death, the cold operation of a machine, the moan of indulgence, and the sound of quicksand falling from an hourglass. Ron was in a trance, his vision was taken away in an instant, and his head was in severe pain as if it had been split open by an axe. He wanted to wail, but no sound came out. He didn't want to listen to the weird murmurs, but the sounds kept pouring into his mind, allowing him to distinguish and feel. Just when Ron was about to lose his strength and his head was about to explode, the whispering in his ears suddenly disappeared, and his body felt light and airy, as if floating in the clouds. He tried his best to regain control of his body, but even a simple action like opening his eyes was difficult to complete. He didn't know how long it had passed, but he seemed to hear a snort, like two pieces of paper stuck together finally being separated. Ron opened his eyes. The first thing that caught the eye was an extremely huge ship. He stood on the deck and looked around. The hull of the ship was pale in color. If you look carefully, you will find that it is made up of countless weird bones. No one knows what kind of creature these bones are. They are as huge as mountain peaks, and at the bow of the ship is a huge head, which looks like a human being, but it is really too big. Bones without any flesh and blood are even more ferocious. The sails hung high were sewn from decayed skin, and countless skulls hung on the railings around the deck. They were the skulls of humans, or elves, or dwarves. Like a wind chime, it sways in the cold wind, making a crunching sound during the collision. Looking further away, there is a dark ocean without any luster. The ink-like sea water is slowly moving like a viscous fluid. Ron's face was solemn, with shock and confusion inevitably showing on his face. This ship was no stranger to him. The boat of Soul Crossing. This is the place where the soul will appear after the player dies in the game Goddess X Black Beast. The surrounding ocean is the eternal sea that players jokingly call the Black Sea. After the player dies, the soul will stay on the soul boat for a period of time, take the soul boat, cross the eternal sea, and finally enter the palace of the past to start over. This place is gloomy, silent, and depressing. It can be said to be one of the maps that makes players feel the most discomfort and fear, and after appearing here in person, that feeling is even stronger. Why would he appear on the soul-crossing boat? Could it be that he is dead? The sudden thoughts that came to his mind made Ron horrified and made his scalp tingle. He subconsciously placed his palms on his chest and passed his fingers through his body silently. Ron's face became darker and darker. Now he is a pure soul body. This is not a discovery worth celebrating. Ron forced himself to calm down. The boat of Soul Crossing, the Eternal Sea. Speaking of which, in the missions released by the system, after defeating System Elsa, can you harvest the Eternal Heart? They are all eternity. Is there some kind of connection between them? Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Ron spotted a ring with a ship-shaped pattern on his right index finger. Through this ring, he seemed to be connected to the ship to some extent. He glanced down at his hands. Boat of crossing souls, only crossing gods. Hiss. Ron leaned back instantly and took a breath. The boat of souls can only ferry gods. Although there were only 8 words, Ron really felt what it meant to be creepy. It's obviously a ferry that transports players' souls, so why has it become a ferry that only transports gods? If you only cross the gods, where will the gods be transported? Ron could feel that although this was the world of the games he had played, there were subtle differences in some aspects. Elsa detached herself from Ron and stood quietly beside him. She seemed not to be at all curious about this mysterious and weird area. The system did not disappear, nor did it give any prompts. This seemed to indicate that his life was not in danger for the time being, and he was probably not dead. Ron looked up, slightly relieved. The same dark night sky is dotted with things that look like stars. Some of them are dark green, some are blue, some are fiery red, some are purple, and they are colorful. Some of them are big, like a full moon, and some are small, like candles that may be extinguished at any time. Ron was slightly startled by the unseen scene. In the game, after the player dies, he can only see the soul-crossing boat and the Black Sea. The sky is just gray and there is nothing. In fact, in the game, after the player gets on the soul-crossing boat, he cannot take any action at all and can only wait quietly to cross the Eternal Sea. The whole process takes about 3 minutes. It is said that it was specially designed by the game company. In order to let players experience the value of life, they should not become P-Society war criminals and commit acts of wanton killing of NPCs in the game. This design was also voted as the most disgusting design by players. But here, Ron's actions were not affected. As if out of pure instinct, he stretched out his right hand and tried to pick off the stars above his head. Anyway, he needed to do something to find a way out of here. However, although these stars seemed very close, no matter how hard Ron stretched his arms, the distance between the two parties would not be reduced at all. He even jumped up, but still couldn't reach it. Fortunately, there was no one else around, otherwise, they would probably think Ron was a lunatic. After a long time, Ron gave up. He glanced at Elsa next to him with some envy. Now everyone is almost the same type of existence, but he is far from being as casual and free as Elsa. In midair, Elsa completely ignored Ron's gaze. With her black and white eyes, she just stared at the soul-crossing boat and the surrounding dark ocean, motionless. I don't know what I'm thinking about, maybe I'm thinking about nothing. The soul body does not need to breathe, but Ron still exhaled habitually. He felt that he was struggling with a system, which was purely a pit in his brain. He looked around again, and this time, he looked more carefully. Looming, you can see countless threads floating in the air. Very thin, thinner than spider silk. Inadvertently, these threads will be ignored. It was so densely packed that it looked like there were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of spiders spinning their webs on this big ship. Spider threads were floating everywhere, even casting a dirty shadow over the soul-carrying boat. Right in front of Ron, a short length of spider silk was emitting an unusual, bright light, shining so brightly that it almost floated onto Ron's face. Ron frowned slightly, stretched out a finger, and brushed away the cobwebs. Buzz. The next moment, Ron's mind was agitated, his mental power was almost drained in a very short period of time, and there was a brief blank in his consciousness. In the northern continent, the Kingdom of Granville is not a particularly powerful country, but it is definitely the richest. This country is rich in a special energy called black oil, which can be used as long as it is dug out of the ground and slightly refined. Cooking, heating, lighting, steam trains, black oil was widely used, which brought amazing wealth to the kingdom. Because there is money, there is luxury. In the early morning, the magic lamp outside the palace that had been bright all night has not been extinguished. Under the soft light, the extremely exquisite glazed tiles are shining with a hazy luster, making the palace enveloped in dreamlike clouds and smoke. You know, I thought I was in the divine realm. It is said that any one of the gems embedded in the pillars can be enough for a commoner family to spend a lifetime. But there is a special place in such a luxurious palace. There is a wall about 6 meters high. The wall is covered with vines, and the ridges of the wall are even covered with rusty blades. The mottled walls looked like they had not been repaired for a long time. Under the early morning sun, tiny insects have begun to spread their wings and fly. Decayed, dilapidated, gloomy and depressing. Outside the wall are knights in heavy armor, with one post every 3 steps and one sentry every 5 steps, completely isolating this area from the rest of the palace. This is the residence of Agnes Holt, the 7th wife of King Granville. This is a very beautiful, impeccably beautiful woman. Her clothes are not gorgeous. A pure white long skirt wraps around her plump and imaginative body. The relatively conservative skirt cannot completely hide Agnes's beauty. It even makes people worry about whether the neckline will be stretched, break. The silk gauze skirt fits the skin closely and outlines graceful curves, especially the outline of a pair of thighs, which is even more fascinating. Even if you don't touch it with your own hands, you can tell just by looking at it that it must be very soft. The cool breeze in the morning blew, and her long silver hair fluttered. Her aquamarine-like eyes looked outside. Outside the hut, there was a high wall. Agnes had the charm to drive men crazy, but she was not a pampered princess. Her marriage to the king was an exchange of pure interests. In order to prevent Agnes from giving birth to a prince, King Granville never even laid a finger on her. The luxurious palace was more like a huge prison to Agnes. She just wants to be free. Escape from this birdcage. Agnes picked up the kettle. She had no shoes on, and stepped on the cold stone slabs with her shiny white feet, preparing to water the flowers and plants in the yard. Agnes had long been used to living the same life for 13 years. However, before she could walk out the door, Twisting threads suddenly appeared in the air in front of her, and they instantly wrapped around Agnes. Agnes frowned slightly and tried to struggle. As a very powerful being, the princess was very confident in her own strength. But soon, the princess's expression changed. As soon as the magic power is mobilized, it will be absorbed completely by the silk threads wrapped around the body in an instant. This momentary change was so fast that the princess had no time to react. Her body had already left the ground, entangled with countless threads, and disappeared out of thin air. When the princess regained her sight again, there was still a look of horror on her face. She looked blankly at the pale bone ship under her feet, at the dark ocean around her, and at the completely different sky above her head. On the other side, Ron tried his best to maintain calm, and did not ask the tasteless question of asking who you are. He was thinking about whether he should maintain the same identity as the other person who suddenly entered this space, or whether he should maintain his unpredictable image. Looking at the princess's beautiful face and slender figure, he suddenly felt something familiar. After a few seconds, Ron almost screamed, "Agnes, isn't this one of the 4 pillars of the Eternal Freedom sect? Is that the hottest villain who makes male players crazy and regretful the most?" Ron was shocked. This woman's strength is only slightly inferior to that of the Pope. She can kill him with one slap. Agnes's beautiful, slender and elegant neck squirmed, and soon she saw a hazy figure at the bow of the ship. There is obviously no fog here. Although it is dark, the visibility is not low for a powerful being. The princess can even see clearly the waves rising on the black ocean further ahead of the bow. But I just couldn't see clearly the appearance of the man on the bow. I can only feel that it seems to be a man. He was tall and thin, as if he were a scholar. She tried to see clearly the appearance of the mysterious man, but a force interfered with her vision, and she could only see a mist. Mysterious, like a black hole, like nothingness, she couldn't even detect Ron's power, but the more this happened, the more fear Agnes felt in her heart. She would not be stupid enough to think that this mysterious existence was a weakling with no power. Thinking about it again, she was forcibly brought to this place without any resistance. The opponent's strength may far exceed hers. She is clearly one of the strongest people in the human world, but Agnes behaves exceptionally well behaved. This is a very proud woman, but she knows better how to react when faced with different existences. Agnes asked in a calm and uneasy tone, "Who are you? Where are you here? What do you want to do?" "What do I want to do? This is a good question. I don't know what I want to do. Is it possible that I don't want to do anything?" He just pulled it casually, and who knew, a boss would be pulled over. He swore that he would never be mean again. Could it be that that thread is Agnes? Bright represents Agnes' strength. As one of the 4 pillars of the Eternal Freedom sect, Agnes possesses near-top human combat power and belongs to the upper level of the pyramid. The short length represents Agnes's lifespan. This beautiful lady will die in the hands of the Valkyrie Ariana 2.5 years later. Looking at Agnes in front of him, Ron felt that it was better for him to pretend to be inscrutable. After all, the other party could slap him to death. At the same time, I couldn't help but sigh in my heart, they are both villains, so why is the gap so big? Look at Agnes, she has a noble status and powerful strength. Even if she is suddenly summoned to the eerie soul-crossing boat, there is no trace of panic on her face. The black belt bound the white skirt, showing off her charming waist, showing her gracefulness and ability. Unlike myself, as the instigator, in the end, she was as calm as an old dog on the surface, but panicked in my heart. Ron knew not to think about it for too long or he would arouse Agnes' suspicion. He spoke slowly in a brisk yet calm tone, "Madam, this is a ship." An absurd feeling emerged in Agnes's heart. What's the difference between your answer and no answer? Of course she knew it was a ship. But the key question is, what kind of ship is this? Where is this ship sailing to? What kind of sea is this? What kind of sky is this? Pure nonsense. If it had been before, she might have felt that the mysterious man in front of her was deliberately teasing her, and she might get angry. But, facing such a terrifying, mysterious existence as deep as a black hole, she had no reason to be angry. She didn't even dare to ask further questions. Listen to that steady voice, it feels like you have everything under control. Even if it is teasing, such a strong man still has the capital to tease himself. The weak can only be reduced to toys. This is the rule of this world. He is stronger than himself, so every word he says has unquestionable power. Fortunately, the mysterious man in front of him seemed to feel that he had said nonsense, and he spoke again. This is the world of the dead. Agnes, who was originally fine, felt a cold air rushing from the soles of her feet to her heart at this moment. She would not be stupid enough to think that the dead in the mysterious mouth meant the king. The world of the dead is the underworld. The elegant neck squirmed slightly. Am I dead? Oh, no, beautiful lady, please don't panic, you are still alive, at least, for the time being, although your lifespan is very short, like a meteor that flashes by in the sky. Agnes couldn't laugh or cry. She didn't know whether she should be grateful to be alive or sad that her lifespan was very short. However, Agnes understood at least one thing. The man in front of her knew her lifespan, and he knew when she would die. Prophet, Grim Reaper, Lord of the Underworld, several names suddenly appeared in her mind, and each of them represented power and mystery. Then why do I appear here? Agnes calmed down and spoke in a calm and respectful tone. Well, because it's boring. Ron tilted his head and thought for a moment before saying. Agnes looked at the unclear figure, feeling more and more absurd, even horrifying. Just because you are bored, force yourself from the main world to the underworld. Isn't this a little too casual? Perhaps, this is the style of a truly strong man. They regard all the rules in the world as nothing. Ron spread his hands and smiled. You know, I'm the only one here, although I occasionally meet some strange guys. For example, Ron thought so, but in Agnes's heart, there was another feeling. The strange guy should refer to other existences of the same level, right? That must be it. Ron didn't know what Agnes was thinking and continued. So, I will occasionally find someone to come over and talk to her. No, it's not that simple. Since this mysterious and great being brought himself here, it must not only be boring, nor can it be just an accidental coincidence. He must have had his intention in doing this. In addition, he deliberately pointed out that his lifespan was very short and his life was about to end. Agnes's chest became hot, and an exciting thought came to her mind. Could it be that this mysterious existence wanted to reverse her fate? A flawless smile appeared on her face, and she spoke in the most pious tone. A mysterious and great existence. Mysterious and great, who can say that? You shouldn't be talking about yourself, right? It seems that the disguised image of inscrutability is working, which is very good. I'm very talented as an actor. Ron praised himself in his mind. Then, he interrupted Agnes. This title is a bit cumbersome. Perhaps you can call me boatman, sailor, pilot, or captain. Agnes's body trembled, and she felt more and more that her guess was correct. Boatman, sailor, isn't that the being who steers this giant ship forward? Pilot, isn't that the existence that guides the direction? Captain, isn't that an existence that has total control over the overall situation and masters everything? Her pretty face was rosy, her slender legs slowly bent, and she knelt on the ground piously, her forehead pressed against the cold and biting deck. Supreme and great being, please guide me forward. Direction. Seeing Agnes, the big boss, kneeling in front of him, what the hell is this? What are you doing? If she said these words now, would this woman jump up and slap herself to death? Ron looked strange and stared at Agnes. Agnes felt Ron's gaze, and she became even more frightened, lying lower. Her figure is already beautiful, and this posture makes her buttocks curve into a round, graceful, elegant and curve. I have to say, this posture should be pretty good. That's all, just give her a little reminder. It's definitely not because of Agnia's figure and beautiful face. Simply because, although Agnia is a villain, she is a nominal type among the 4 pillars of gods. She has a lofty status, but she does not participate in the management of the Eternal Freedom sect, and she has not committed any crimes. She is just chasing freedom and wants to break the birdcage that imprisons her. It is for this reason that many players try to capture Agnes. Unfortunately, no one can succeed, and she will also be destroyed with the destruction of the Eternal Freedom sect. And die. You only have 2.5 years left in your life. Agnes, who was lying on the ground, shook violently. You are filled with confusion. You long for freedom, to break free from the prison. But the path you chose is wrong. Freedom does not mean indulgence. The prophetic words and sounds shocked Agnes's heart. Freedom does not mean indulgence. Does he mean that he should not believe in the God of eternal freedom? Agnes felt indescribable fear, and finally she lowered her head again. Thank you for your guidance. Seeing Agnes, the big villain, bow to him, it felt really strange. Ron exhaled. He was guiding a big villain to the right path. I am so great. At this time, Ron felt extremely tired and had a splitting headache. Ron realized clearly that his spirit was on the verge of drying up and he could no longer stay here. On the finger, the ring began to feel scorching heat. He took a deep breath. It's time for you to go back. At the same time, he tried to open the door to return Agnes in his heart. Although he didn't know whether he could succeed, Ron had to try. Agnes, who wanted to continue asking, closed her mouth, and a dark door appeared beside her. Agnes lowered her head again. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Ron tilted his head and smiled. Maybe you can help me find. Ron's notes. There's a chance it could fall into the hands of the eternal liberals. Larnaca City, Moral Cathedral. Herman's heavy footsteps stepped on the slightly damp cobblestone ground, making a muffled sound. He rushed into the church and glanced at the old figure who was praying in front of the statue of the goddess. There was a hint of disdain in his eyes, and then his expression quickly returned to normal. Dear Archbishop Gerald, please arrange more power for me. I swear that I will personally kill Ron, this despicable occultist. Herman's low roar echoed in the church, which was incompatible with the quiet and solemn atmosphere. Gerald, who was short and looked like an ordinary little old man, did not respond immediately. Instead, he insisted on finishing the prayer and drew a pattern of a rising sun on his chest with his fingers before standing up. He glanced at Herman and exhaled, his wrinkled face trembling. It's great that Ron is not dead. What? Herman was shocked. He didn't understand why the Archbishop would be grateful that a cultist didn't die. Archbishop Gerald took out a document and handed it to Herman. As rows of words came into view, Herman's expression became increasingly gloomy. He is the Duke Copperfield of the Spang theocracy next door, but if we really kill him, it will inevitably cause conflicts between the two countries. They don't care about Ron, but this does not prevent them from treating Ron. His death can be used as a condition that can be easily exploited. With the Dragon clan suppressing it, it will not start a war, but it will cause trouble and compensation. And Ron, his research on ancient characters is also very important for us to interpret some ancient documents of the Church of the Goddess of Dawn. Herman was unwilling, and his voice sounded like it was squeezed out of his throat. However, he violated the Church's nuns, which is detrimental to the dignity and glory of the Church. If we cannot punish Ron, the Church of the Goddess of Dawn will be reduced to a laughingstock. At this moment, a sound of footsteps came from outside. Aurelia, whose soles were still sticky, finally entered the church with her long legs. Her amber eyes glanced at Herman without stopping too much. Aurelia showed impeccable etiquette before speaking. Dear Archbishop, Ron did not hurt me, he did not do anything to me. I'm willing to be examined by other nuns. Although this was a very shameful and insulting behavior, Aurelia still decided this way, not to save Herman, she just wanted to prove Ron's innocence. Gerald watched Aurelia silently. He could see Aurelia's persistence. He no longer hesitated and called an older nun to take Aurelia into the side hall. The waiting is anxious, especially for Herman. After all, no one wants to have a green head all the time. A few minutes passed before Aurelia and the older nun finally returned to the hall. The old nun nodded at Gerald. There is no doubt that Sister Aurelia is still pure. With one word, Herman breathed a sigh of relief. A smile broke out on his face, and he leaned towards Aurelia, as if he wanted to talk to Aurelia. But Aurelia was unusually indifferent. She didn't even look at Herman. She just looked at Gerald. Your Excellency the Archbishop, Mr. Ron was kidnapped by the followers of the Eternal Freedom Sect. He himself has no feelings for the Eternal Freedom Sect. Very repulsive. I think we should give Mr. Ron a chance. Herman was irritated and jealous. Although Aurelia was still pure, this woman actually spoke for Ron, which was hard for Herman to accept. Gerald thought for a moment. As an archbishop, he obviously had more things to consider. Not to mention Ron's research on ancient writings. As the senior leader of the Eternal Freedom Sect branch, he must know many sects. The secret is also very beneficial to the Dawn Goddess Church. In just a few seconds, Gerald had made a decision. With a warm smile on his old face, Sister Aurelia, you were right, joining the cult was not his original intention, we should give him a chance. You two join me and maybe we can get him into the arms of the goddess. Herman's expression suddenly changed. That Ron humiliated him so hard that not only did he not have to accept any punishment, he even invited him to join the church. Why was his slap in the face so in vain? Are his teeth white? Faintly, my face seemed to hurt even more. Aurelia smiled. Thank you for your tolerance, Your Excellency the Archbishop, can you allow me to go back first? I just want to wash up. Of course, my boy. Watching Aurelia leave, Herman quickly followed from behind. Aurelia. He called out Aurelia's name, but got no response. Herman could only speed up his pace and stop in front of Aurelia. When he looked at Aurelia, Herman didn't seem to hate her so much anymore. This woman is indeed very beautiful and worthy of his status. Aurelia looked at Herman quietly. Is something wrong? The quiet gaze made Herman a little embarrassed. He coughed softly. Ahem, Aurelia, I'm sorry, I was too impulsive before. But it's not my fault, I was just too impulsive. Sad, so angry. A sarcastic smile appeared on Aurelia's lips, so you vent your anger on your fiancé. Sure enough, Mr. Ron was right. As long as he is pure, Herman will come back. But she didn't feel happy about it at all, only endless sadness in her heart. What Herman really cares about is her purity, not her. Mr. Ron is really a good person. Even though Herman once tried to kill him, he actually provided himself with a way to save Herman. In comparison, Herman is really. Aurelia shook her head, feeling that her affection for Mr. Ron had improved again. Actually, in the final analysis, it's Ron's fault. If this guy could explain it clearly from the beginning. Herman was still mumbling, blaming all the faults on Ron, completely forgetting about it. He took action immediately the moment he saw Ron, without giving Ron the slightest chance to explain. Aurelia sighed slightly. If there was still a little hope for Herman in her heart, now, the last hope has been completely shattered. This man has no responsibility and he never feels that he has done anything wrong. She looked at the nagging man quietly. Mr. Herman, why are you telling me this? Our engagement has been terminated. Can you please step aside? I want to go back and change my clothes. Herman's face suddenly stiffened. This was wrong. In his imagination, as long as he apologized a little, Aurelia should shed tears and throw herself into his arms again. What exactly went wrong? A name suddenly flashed in Herman's mind, and he stared at Aurelia's leaving back, his face becoming extremely vicious. Ron, it must be him, it must be because of this fool that Aurelia is so indifferent to him. His fingers clenched tightly, killing him, must kill him. On the other side, Aurelia returned to her room, feeling a little happy at the thought of seeing Ron again soon, and she couldn't help but have a faint smile on her face. Slender fingers opened the closet, which was filled with all kinds of intimate clothing, full of temptation. But soon, Aurelia's smile turned into distress. Pantyhose, suspenders, thigh socks. Black, white, flesh-colored. I wonder what type Mr. Ron likes. You can't try everything, right? Your will be obeyed. The boat of soul crossing. Agnes was not surprised by the mysterious and great existence and knew her other identity, and even took it for granted. Saluting Ron again, the door beside him opened on its own, gradually swallowing Agnes. Given Agnes' status in the Eternal Freedom Sect, if the notebook is really in the hands of the sect, it shouldn't be difficult to get it. Just after Agnes disappeared, in front of her eyes, the thread representing Agnes was extending silently. It only stopped when it extended to double its original size. The silk thread was squirming and floating, one end slowly floated towards Ron, and wrapped around Ron's little finger. Ron frowned, wondering if this meant that Agnes's fate was already entangled with him. My head hurts more and more. After taking a look at the soul-crossing boat, he felt regretful in his heart. If he had stronger mental power, he would really like to explore the soul-crossing boat. As his mind went blank, when he opened his eyes again, he returned to the study. The stone slab covered with strange words was still lying quietly on the desk. Unprecedented fatigue hit him, and he seemed to have lost control of his limbs. He took a few steps back tremblingly and sat on a chair, breathing heavily. The sunlight passed through the glass and shone on Ron's face, reflecting an unusually pale face. A few seconds later, a slight smile appeared on Ron's face. After meeting Agnes, one of the 4 pillars of the Eternal Freedom sect, he was still alive. It felt really exciting. However, he vowed that he would never be mean again. If Agnes is dragged here this time, there's no telling what kind of being will be dragged next time. Not every time, you will be so lucky. The ring representing the soul crossing boat is still on his finger. Ron felt a little refreshed. He stood up and happened to see his figure reflected in the mirror from the corner of his eye. A tall, thin young man with a bit of a bookish air, short black hair, clear facial features, and bright blue eyes, like the deep sea. Ron muttered under his breath, "I'm quite handsome." At this moment he heard footsteps and could see figures through the window. Ron put away all the rubbings and slates on the desk. Then, he quickly walked to the living room of the inner courtyard. When Gerald brought Aurelia, Herman and another bishop to the inner courtyard, he only saw Ron sitting quietly on a chair. Half of his body was bathed in sunlight, and half was shrouded in shadow. He was leisurely and quietly reading a thick book in his hand. The quiet and mysterious atmosphere makes people unbearable to disturb. Aurelia's eyes were shining, and she felt that her chest seemed to be a little hot. Perhaps, this was a truly elegant gentleman. As for Gerald, he had a kind smile on his face from beginning to end. Although he was a distinguished archbishop, he did not feel offended at all. He just stood there quietly, waiting. Only Herman and the bishop next to him looked impatient. Ron did not keep these people waiting for too long. He slowly closed the book and raised his eyes with a soft smile on his face. "Archbishop Gerald, you are finally here. It's a little later than I thought." Gerald's slightly cloudy eyes examined the young man in front of him. His elegant and book-like style is very suitable for his status as a scholar. The blue eyes are like the deep sea, with the magic of seeing everything and the confidence that everything is under control. His face was a little pale, but this paleness made Ron's sense of mystery even more aggravating. He has great strength that has never been mentioned in the intelligence, and can easily suppress Herman with one hand. More than 100 cultists and 500 Dawn Knights could only hang their heads and remain silent. How could such an outstanding being not be valued by the family? Could it be that the Copperfield family are all blind fools and no one can see the value of Ron? This is impossible. There was only one reason, and that was that Ron didn't want to be involved in mundane matters like family strife, so he deliberately hid his clumsiness. To Ron, the power, status, and wealth of the Duke's family were like yellow mud on the ground, worthless. It is really rare to have such character at such a young age. This was Gerald's first impression when he saw Ron. "I have to say that this little old man is very good at brainstorming." "Archbishop Gerald, you are finally here. It's a little later than I thought." Ron's voice was casual, like an old friend he hadn't seen for a long time. However, Gerald was slightly shocked in his heart. "You knew I would come a long time ago, were you waiting for me?" Ron smiled slightly and didn't answer. It is important to maintain a sense of mystery. The other party may not believe what you say, but he will definitely believe what the other party has imagined. Ever since he deceived Agnes, Ron found that he liked this kind of deception more and more. Looking over Gerald, Ron felt a little regretful. This is a good man, a pure good man, but it is a pity that he will not live long. Soon, Gerald will perish along with the city of Larnaca. Ron looked at the blushing Aurelia next to him, and he was surprised to find that Aurelia's favorability towards him had increased again, now reaching 70. Perhaps it was because he had been on the soul-crossing boat before, so there was no system prompt. He glanced speechlessly at Herman, who had been trying to get closer to Aurelia. What on earth did this guy do to make Aurelia's favorability towards him slowly increase? Sure enough, keeping Herman alive was the most correct decision. This guy is worthy of being a gold medal support. As long as Herman is here, Aurelia can be easily conquered. While Gerald was still savoring the meaning of Ron's smile, the last man next to him couldn't help it anymore. This is a slim and tall middle-aged man, with upturned eyes and a hooked nose, somewhat ruthless. He is wearing a black robe, which proves his identity. He is a bishop of the Church of the Goddess of Dawn. If you want to become a bishop, your own strength is essential. This is a genuine, disaster-level master. Staring at Ron with his narrow eyes, the bishop did not hide his hostility towards Ron at all. His voice was also hoarse and quite unpleasant, pretending. "Archbishop Gerald, I really don't understand why you want to come here to meet a cultist in person, and even want to recruit him. Herman next to him had a slightly proud face on his face. Bishop Virgil was from the same faction as him. In his own words, Gerald might not care. But what Bishop Virgil said, even as an archbishop, Gerald had to think carefully. Aurelia is his woman. Ron must not be allowed to join the church, as this would create more opportunities for him and Aurelia to come into contact. From the beginning to the end, Virgil's eyes were fixed on Ron. Ron's magic power was very weak. He would not take such a weak person to heart at all. He even wondered whether this man used something to defeat Herman. Despicable means. He spoke without any scruples. No matter what identity this person is or what talents he has, it cannot change the fact that he was once a cultist. The purity of the Church of the Dawn Goddess cannot be tarnished. I question your decision. Gerald frowned, worried that Ron would be angry. But Ron still had a calm smile on his face, and he didn't seem to have any emotional fluctuations at all because of Virgil's words. He is calm and unhuman. Ron even waved to Virgil. Bishop Virgil, right. Can you come over here? What for? Virgil curled his lips, but still stepped forward and walked towards Ron. He wanted to see what this bumbling guy wanted to do, a sneak attack. That's really what you want. Don't treat him like a loser like Herman. Ron finally stood up and leaned into Virgil's ear. Is Sister Isaiah okay? Bishop, you don't want others to know about the matter between you and Sister Isaiah, right? This little accent. Ron's voice was very soft, so soft that Gerald and others couldn't hear it. But in Virgil's ears, the voice sounded like a devil's whisper. His body trembled suddenly and then stiffened for an instant. His dark brown eyes showed incredible shock, as if it was pure instinct. Virgil exclaimed, "How do you know?" Bishop Virgil's gaffe was also seen by Herman, Gerald and Aurelia. Looking at each other, no one knew what Ron had said to Virgil, which actually caused such a big fuss from Virgil. Virgil also noticed that he had lost his composure. His throat squirmed slightly, and he suppressed his violently beating heart. His eyes even narrowed to a slit. At this moment, an unprecedented strong murderous intention emerged in his heart. As long as Ron is killed, everything will be. Beep. The system prompts that the infinite death system is activated. Mission background. You revealed Virgil's secret, and he seems to want to kill you. Although this may bring him some trouble, as the bishop of Virgil's Church of the Dawn Goddess, he wants to calm this kind of thing and not difficult. Mission goal. Survive. There are many people in this world who want to kill you, so try to survive. Task reward. Random. Death countdown. 60 seconds. The system prompt sounded, and Ron had gradually figured out the rules of the system. The system will only issue a prompt when someone wants to kill him and has the strength to kill him. That guy Herman was probably the one who wanted to kill him most of all, but unfortunately, except for the very beginning, the system never gave any prompts about Herman. At the same time, this also means that Bishop Virgil in front of him has the strength to kill him, and he is worthy of being at the same level as the inspector of the Eternal Freedom sect. Although Ron has a highly enhanced equipment, the grade of the equipment is too low. Virgil himself has the strength of the 7 disaster stars. At the same time, although the degree of enhancement of the equipment is not high, it is of good grade. Overall, it is still much stronger than himself. What a terrible find. But Ron didn't panic at all. In his eyes, this mission was simply a waste. Even if Virgil is stronger than him, it is completely impossible to kill him instantly. As long as he can withstand the first wave of attacks, Gerald will never allow Virgil to continue to attack. After surviving the first wave, there was no pressure on Ron. Just like this, there was no worry at all on Ron's face, and his smile even became stronger. You want to kill me? He even opened his arms. You are very strong, the strength of the 7 disaster level stars. If you want to kill me, it is as easy as squeezing an ant to death. Come on. What are you waiting for? Hiss. Why can Ron see his disaster level 7 star strength at a glance? You know, he had just broken through to the catastrophic 7 stars a few days ago, and no one in the entire church knew about it. Even Gerald didn't know. Why could Ron see through it at a glance? Could it be said that Ron is stronger than Gerald? Virgil leaned back instinctively, as if he wanted to put some distance between him and Ron. Ron obviously took the initiative to open his arms, with flaws all over his body, looking like he was seeking death, but at this moment, Virgil didn't dare to take action. This guy must have something to rely on, otherwise, he would never dare to be so confident. Thinking about it again, Ron could easily defeat Herman, suppress 500 Dawn Knights, and 100 cult followers. Originally, Virgil suspected that Ron had used some despicable means. But now it seems that maybe he really has this kind of strength. The weak magic fluctuations on his body must be just his disguise. The thought that suddenly appeared in his mind frightened Virgil. Shameless, it's fun to pretend to be a pig and eat the tiger, right? Virgil's throat continued to squirm, and Ron's soft gaze fell on him, which made the scalp of this relatively strong bishop tingle. The more he looked at it, the more mysterious it seemed. Ron seemed to be covered in a layer of fog, blocking his sight and making it impossible for him to see through it at all. You can't do it, you absolutely can't do it. Once he takes action, I'm afraid it won't be Ron who dies, but himself. In an instant, the killing intent in his chest completely disappeared. Virgil suddenly turned around and looked at Gerald. Dear Archbishop, I think Mr. Ron is a good man, kind. He fully meets the criteria for joining the Church of the Goddess of Dawn. Puff. As soon as this statement came out, everyone was shocked. Herman even sprayed it directly. Why did Virgil's attitude change so drastically? You said before that Ron was just a despicable cultist and suddenly he became a good person. So shameless. Are you changing your face too quickly? At the same time, Herman felt the strong anger of being betrayed. Virgil was obviously on his side, so why was he speaking for Ron now? Aurelia, Virgil, why do they all betray themselves? Why, beep, the system prompts, congratulations to the host for successfully surviving and receiving the mission reward, including a 10th lottery ticket. Congratulations to the host, the lottery function is enabled. Little crisis solved. The system has opened new functions. Virgil's stiff face forced a smile that was uglier than crying. Mr. Ron, what happened before was all a misunderstanding. There is another thing you said wrong. I am a priest, how can I kill people easily? Don't accuse someone of their innocence out of thin air. These hateful strong men always like to play tricks like pretending to be pigs and eating tigers. Will teasing weak people like themselves bring them great spiritual joy and satisfaction? What kind of shitty fetish is this? Doesn't their conscience hurt? Ron didn't care about the changes in the system for the time being, he just scoffed at Virgil's words. Desecrating people's innocence. Do you think you are Kong Yi? Those who return to the priesthood will not kill people easily. In the entire Church of the Goddess of Dawn, there are the most murderers. Followers of the Lord of Blood and Destruction have to call you, Ancestor, when they see you. In the game, Virgil is a very different character. In the early stage, his strength was not too strong, but this person seemed to be blessed by fate. The original Ron turned into an evil spirit, causing the tragedy of Larnaca City, and thousands of priests were killed. The man dies, Virgil lives. Then the entire city of Larnaca was destroyed, and the most powerful Gerald also died here, while Virgil was still alive. With the decline of the Church of the Goddess of Dawn, a large number of forces encircled and suppressed, and the masters suffered heavy casualties, but Virgil was still alive. Until the fourth part, the Church of the Dawn Goddess fell to the bottom, and the time for Virgil to rise finally arrived. Relying on his strong strength, this guy quickly wiped out all opposition voices within the church, led the Church of the Dawn Goddess, and used absolutely ruthless means to destroy the church. The hostile forces were cleared one by one. Fight wherever you go, until no one dares to be an enemy of the Dawn Goddess Church, until the Dawn Goddess Church regains its foothold. It's a pity that this guy caused too many murders, and the Church of the Dawn Goddess has always taught kindness and tolerance. This made Virgil a thorn in the eyes of many conservative clergy, and was eventually burned on the stake by his own people. All in all, this is a guy with a bright future. And Zhonghu is not just about fighting and killing, it is also about human relations. Ron didn't want to completely break up with such a guy. He smiled and retracted his arms. You were just kidding, you won't mind, right? Actually, I have no ill intentions towards the priests of the Goddess of Dawn. I just have a small conflict with Herman. If possible, I hope to maintain a good relationship with the bishop. This will be good for both of us, isn't it? Virgil breathed a sigh of relief. this is my honor, dear sir. Then he lowered his voice and asked in a low voice, Sir, how do you know about Isaiah? How much do you really know? What else do you know? I only know what I know. Seeing that Virgil seemed a little incomprehensible, Ron sighed a little disappointedly. It felt a bit lonely with no one to answer his questions. He coughed softly to relieve the embarrassment. Mr. Virgil, I know Isaiah is a very beautiful nun, but, do you really know her? Virgil said confidently. Of course, I am not a fool who will be dazzled by beauty. I have investigated Isaiah's background and it is very clean. What if I said Isaiah would burn you at the stake? Virgil's eyes suddenly shrank, his expression was gloomy, and he was thinking about something with his rapidly flashing eyes. Why do you say that? Isaiah is a spy planted by the Spang theocracy in the Heart of Nature Church. If others know that you have in-depth communications with spies from the Spang theocracy. Bishop Virgil, what do you think will happen? This is a crime of treason and apostasy. Virgil was smart, but he had no doubts about the woman next to him. After all, when Virgil was rising, he and Sister Isaiah had been together for more than 20 years. Even when Virgil was at his lowest, Isaiah never abandoned Virgil. Jill. Virgil never dreamed that this woman who was almost his wife would betray him in the end. Under Virgil's leadership, the Church of the Goddess of Dawn and the Kingdom of Granville prospered. For the Spang theocracy and the Heart of Nature Church, which had been seeking the territory and wealth of the Granville Kingdom, Virgil became the biggest enemy. In order to kill Virgil, the Spang theocracy and the Heart of Nature Church used various methods, but all ended in failure. Finally, they controlled remotely to have Isaiah reveal his identity, and then Virgil was burned to death for the crime of treason. Virgil's eyes suddenly turned cold. He didn't completely believe Ron's words, but when Ron reminded him, he seemed to really feel that Isaiah's usual behavior was slightly weird. She offered her body and clung to the bishop. But he never pursues power or wealth. So what does she want? Virgil didn't believe that there really were such pure and clean people in this world. It was impossible for a pure and clean person to sacrifice his body in order to cling to the bishop. He took a deep breath and bowed to Ron. Mr. Ron, thank you for your guidance. I, Virgil, will never forget this kindness. If you are of any use to me in the future, please feel free to ask. As long as I can do it, I will never refuse. What a cunning guy. It seemed that he was committed, but he obviously left himself some leeway. Virgil ended his communication with Ron and took 2 steps back. Only then did Archbishop Gerald and Aurelia step forward. Gerald looked at Ron with very complicated eyes. Although he had changed his view of Ron once, he still underestimated this man. Being able to suppress Virgil with just a few words is definitely not something that ordinary people can do. Gerald quickly adjusted his mood and regained his kind-hearted look. Mr. Ron, you seem to know us very well. This saves you the trouble of introducing yourself. I have a presumptuous question, I don't know whether to ask it or not. Ron smiled. Please, I want to know, where is your current strength? Gerald asked a rather pointed question. Ron didn't hesitate at all. 2 extraordinary stars. A sound of disgust could be clearly heard from all around, even Aurelia was no exception. Extraordinary 2 stars. Who are you fooling? The extraordinary 2 stars are not much stronger than ordinary people. Can they slap the panic level Herman away with a slap? Can you shock the disaster level Virgil? If you are an extraordinary 2-star, I, Gerald, will read the 4 characters backwards. The dogs didn't believe it. Unless you upgrade all your garbage equipment to 13. But this is even more nonsense than Ron's extraordinary 2-star strength. Seeing the suspicious eyes around him, Ron looked strange and spread his hands. You believe me, I am really a 2nd-star extraordinary person. This is the one who just completed the mission and was just promoted. Several people around were nodding their heads. Okay, if you say extraordinary 2 stars, just extraordinary 2 stars. If you want to hide your strength, just say so. It will force you to show all your strength, and your lies won't even sound the same. Ron was helpless. It was rare for him to tell the truth, so why didn't anyone believe him? It's hard to be an honest person in this world. I have another question. Gerald no longer struggled with Ron's strength. What is your identity? Ron Copperfield, concubine of the Copperfield family of Spang theocracy, scholar of ancient writing. Ron replied simply. Gerald's smile did not change. That's it. He believed that Ron's true identity and abilities were much more than what was recorded in the newspaper. Although it seemed that Ron was kidnapped by the Eternal Freedom Sect, attacked by Herman, and surrounded by the Knights of Dawn, in fact, judging from the process and results, almost everything was under Ron's control. Originally, Ron was no longer prepared to keep pretending. After all, it was a bit too much. But looking at him now, if he couldn't reveal anything, it would be difficult to reassure the old man. A thought quickly flashed through his mind, and the smile on Ron's face gradually disappeared, replaced by solemnity and solemnity. His hands were gently raised, as if hugging something, and his eyes were slightly raised to stare at the sky above his head. That gesture seemed to be able to see countless scenes in Ron's eyes that others could not see. His voice was low and ethereal. Or, you can call me Prophet, Prophet. As soon as these words came out, there was silence all around. Everyone's eyes widened and their mouths opened wide, but no sound came out. After a long time passed, Herman was the first to break the silence. He grinned and smiled. I laughed so hard that I felt like I had heard the best joke in the world. There are indeed some people in this world who claim to be able to peer into destiny. They are astrologers who can peer into the future to some extent through changes in the stars. But even the best astrologers can only perceive some vague and specious signs. If you practice astrology to the extreme, you will be a great prophet. The great prophet's control of the future is better, but he can only glimpse some fragmented fragments. There is a great prophet in the Spang theocracy next door, who is revered as the national master. However, this great prophet's judgments about the future are wrong 5 times out of 10, which makes people seriously suspect that this guy is a liar. As for the one who is better than the great prophet, that is the legendary prophet. They are mysterious and elegant, know the future, understand destiny, and stir up the storm in the wave of time. They are ethereal and cold. It is clear that just a few words can change the direction of the world, but no matter how tragic the war, disaster, plague or famine, no matter how tragic the scene is, they cannot shake their rock-like hearts. They regard themselves as the guardians of destiny, believing that everyone's destiny is determined at the moment of birth, and that all lives follow a predetermined trajectory. They will not allow any deviation in the thread of fate, and they will kill all existences that try to resist fate. And now, Ron actually calls himself a prophet. Do you dare to be a little more crazy? Why don't you claim to be God? In the empty hall, only Herman's wild laughter echoed, becoming more and more harsh. Ron didn't feel offended at all. He just smiled and looked at Herman quietly, as if he were a clown. Gerald just frowned slightly, but he was the one who accepted it the most. After all, he had suspected Ron's identity before. Although Aurelia was shocked, there was no doubt in Ron's eyes at all. No matter what Ron said, she seemed to believe it unconditionally, except for the extraordinary 2 stars. Virgil's expression was quite strange. When he first heard the word prophet, his first thought was that it was impossible. The prophet was just a legendary existence. How could it really happen? But, thinking about what Ron just said, he knew that Gerald would come to him. He knew that Sister Isaiah was beside him. He knew that Isaiah was a spy of the Spang theocracy. He knew that he would come to him because of Isaiah. He was accused of treason and apostasy and sent to the stake. It wouldn't be surprising if Ron really was a prophet. After a long time, Herman's laughter finally stopped, and he was the only one laughing loudly around him, which was a bit embarrassing. Clearing his throat, Herman said coldly, "Since you are a prophet, tell me, when will our world be destroyed?" "Sorry, this is beyond my ability," Ron replied honestly. "Actually, the world will not be destroyed easily. What will become extinct are the creatures living in this world. For example, humans, dragons, giants, elves. In the near future, a great race will die." What followed was a disaster that swept the world. As soon as these words came out, except for Ron, the expressions of the other 3 people all changed. What disaster? When? Which great race is it? The dragon race or the giant race? Gerald asked quickly. He didn't believe in any prophets, but he didn't know why. The moment Ron said these words, there was an indescribable fear deep in his heart, which made his hair stand on end. Today, there are 2 races in the world that claim to be great, the dragons and the giants. Among them, the dragons are the rulers of the world. They exercise authority on behalf of the gods and maintain the order of the world. They are proud and powerful, and believe that the dragon family is the most noble and perfect existence in the world. The giants, on the other hand, consider themselves to be descendants of a master who once ruled the world, and have great blood flowing through them. No, Gerald, do you really believe it? Wake up, he is lying to you, Herman said angrily, forgetting even the honorific. Gerald was in an irritable mood and glanced at Herman. If it weren't for Herman's father, he would never have allowed such a useless guy to stay in Moral Cathedral. He prayed that Ron would reveal more information. Ron, on the other hand, cast his gaze towards the scorching sun in the sky. After a long silence, Ron finally spoke slowly, his voice low but not deep, with a hint of etherealness. The eternal city is hidden in the gray sky. When the scorching sun loses its light, it will come to the world and bring death. Look, it's magnificent. Behold the lost power. But a dark wind blew by, leaving only blood and a vast expanse of blood. Ron improvised a prophetic poem based on his inferior literary skills, and suddenly felt much better. The prophetic poem should be ambiguous and let the other party guess. This is called the demeanor of a master. You guessed it, that's my prediction. If you guessed wrong, it's because you don't have enough understanding and your understanding is wrong. It has nothing to do with me. I don't know if Ron is pretending to be too similar, but the sun is obviously scorching, but Aurelia, Virgil, and Gerald can't feel the slightest warmth. It's as if there is a real wind blowing, and their whole bodies are chilled. A furry feeling of fear crept into my heart silently. The prophetic poem did not provide much substantive content, but the scorching sun lost its light, bringing death and blood, all symbolizing ominousness. The deep depression makes it difficult to breathe. Only Herman curled his lips in disdain. In his eyes, Ron was just pretending. After a long time, Gerald seemed to finally recover a little from the fear. He glanced at Ron. When? Ron didn't answer. He just turned around and glanced at the clock hanging on the wall of the living room, then slowly stretched out 5 fingers. 5 years, but at this moment, Ron suddenly curled up a thumb. 4. Everyone's eyes widened. It wasn't 5 years, but 5 seconds. Who is the prophet who has nothing to do to predict what will happen in 5 seconds? Are you sure you didn't come here to make a joke? Even Aurelia, Virgil and Gerald were all bluffed by Ron's mysterious and depressing atmosphere before, and were about to believe the prophet's words, but now they all couldn't help but feel that their minds were it's not a show, otherwise how could you believe such nonsense? Herman even sneered. If your prediction is accurate, I, Herman, will kneel down and call you Grandpa. 5 seconds. You are really asking for humiliation. He couldn't wait to see Ron in such disgrace. When nothing happens after 5 seconds, he will definitely laugh at this idiot. 3. Ron, on the other hand, didn't care at all about the expressions of others around him, and just counted down slowly. 2. 1. The moment Ron's voice just fell, the world suddenly darkened. Looking up at the sky, there was a gap in the previously radiant sun, as if a giant beast was opening its bloody mouth to swallow up the scorching sun hanging high in the sky. When the scorching sun loses its light. Recalling the prophetic poem Ron had just written, an indescribable sense of fear instantly climbed into everyone's heart. Looking at Ron again, the figure standing quietly on the spot, unmoving in the falling eternal darkness. The scorching sun is being devoured. It was as if there was an invisible cold wind blowing over the body, and the coolness that penetrated into the bone marrow made everyone shiver. Feeling the gazes from all around, Ron's mouth twitched slightly, and the tension in his chest finally slowly subsided. Fortunately, he remembered the time correctly. The space between heaven and earth is getting darker and darker, and the gap between the scorching sun above our heads is getting wider and wider. The whole world was shrouded in an unbreakable shadow. Gradually, not only Gerald and Aurelia, but also the entire Bruno Street and the entire Larnaca city felt the changes in the sky. They walked out of the room and stayed in the yard and on the street, looking at the sun that was gradually being swallowed up in the sky, their faces pale. For a world where gods really exist, the fear caused by a total solar eclipse is conceivable. Countless people regard it as divine punishment, and the entire city falls into unprecedented chaos. Suddenly, on Bruno Street, a young man seemed to be unable to bear the pressure in his chest anymore. He knelt on the ground with a thud, his forehead pressed to the ground, and his whole body was covered in sweat. Oh, the supreme goddess of dawn, I have committed adultery. The sin of lust, I should not have peeked at Mrs. Melrose taking a bath next door, 67 times, please forgive me for my sin. After the first person knelt on the ground and poured out his sins to the gods, the second, third, and fourth, appeared one after another. Not long after, the entire Bruno Street fell to their knees. And this trend, like a raging tsunami, swept across the entire city of Larnaca in an instant. Looking around, there were figures kneeling on the ground everywhere. The fear almost turned into reality, and even Ron could feel the twisted atmosphere. Even beings with relatively good strength like Virgil and Herman seemed to be affected. Their legs were trembling, and they seemed to want to kneel on the ground and explain their sins. When the last ray of sunlight was blocked, the whole world fell into darkness. Gerald and Aurelia's hearts trembled suddenly, and their faces became paler. They thought again of the prophetic poem Ron had said before. The everlasting city is hidden in the gray sky. As soon as this thought came to mind, an extremely exaggerated tremor suddenly came from his feet, as if the world was going to topple at this moment. Even a strong man like Gerald was caught off guard and found it difficult to stand still, his body swinging involuntarily. A terrifying wind blew between heaven and earth. Rumble. A deafening sound, like thunder exploding, followed closely behind. Virgil, Aurelia, and Herman only felt their minds buzzing, and their brains seemed to have completely lost the ability to think. Only Gerald, relying on his own strong strength, could barely maintain his figure. Looking in the direction of the sound, Gerald suddenly took a breath of cold air. I can only see the distant horizon, above the towering mountain peaks, and I don't know when a huge golden city has appeared. Even though it is thousands of miles away, the giant city is still majestic and majestic. In the prophetic poem, the city that never decays really appears. And that location is exactly above the Dragon Valley. The Archbishop's face changed wildly, he was indeed a dragon. He guessed correctly. According to Ron's prophecy, the dragon clan will bleed into rivers and suffer heavy losses. No, it is not that it will suffer heavy losses, but it will perish and wither. In an instant, the Archbishop's scalp went numb. The appearance of the giant city has confirmed that Ron really has the ability to see into the future. Is the dragon clan really going to perish? This is the most powerful race in the entire continent and the master of the world. The dragon shares the authority of the gods, travels the continent on behalf of the gods, and manages the world. In some ways, the dragon clan is a pretty good manager, and they have always maintained peace in the world. And their method of mediating disputes is also very simple and crude. Once there is a conflict between two countries, the Dragon Clan's envoys will descend on the battlefield and order the fighting parties to cease fire immediately and return to their original borders. Once a country tries to resist, the dragon's breath will drown you in an instant. Under the rule of the dragon, the entire world has not had a war for thousands of years. As for the dirty things behind the scenes, the dragon didn't care. Dragon-slaying warrior. For this world where dragons hold the most powerful power, dragon-slaying warriors never existed. Gerald's face turned pale in an instant, and he seemed to have aged dozens of years all of a sudden. His short body became more stooped, and his cloudy eyes revealed a strong sense of despair and sorrow, war, torment, coming. Once the dragon's suppression is lost, the world that has been peaceful for thousands of years may usher in unprecedented strife. By then, how many people will die under the iron heel? Gerald couldn't imagine that kind of scene. He seemed to have seen hell before his eyes. In fact, Gerald's worries are very accurate. In the game, the chaos of the world began after the demise of the Dragon Clan. In just a few years in the game, the world's population dropped by 30%. It was after the demise of the Dragon Clan that the Spang theocracy used the murder of the Duke's son in the Kingdom of Granville as an excuse to invade the Kingdom of Granville. The two sides engaged in a war that lasted for several years, and the Kingdom of Granville was once forced into a desperate situation, almost destroyed the country. On the other side, Aurelia and Virgil, who had come back to their senses, looked at Ron with only deep shock and even fear. Originally, they didn't particularly believe in prophecies. Even Aurelia believed more in Ron than in the so-called prophecies. But now, the scorching sun has lost its light. A huge city stretches across the sky. The prediction made by Ron was quickly realized in a short period of time. They also had to admit that Ron really had the ability to see into the future. He was really a prophet. Herman's face felt even hotter. The ridicule he had just felt towards Ron was like a loud slap on his face. In the sky, the blocked sun began to shine again, and the warm sunshine shone on the body, but everyone only felt that their hands and feet were cold. In the distant horizon, the huge city made of gold began to shine with bright golden light, stinging everyone's eyes. Twilight Temple. In-game, the ultimate copy of the first expansion pack. In the Temple of Twilight, one of the 13 ultimate forbidden spells in the game is buried, Ragnarok. Of course, that is not a place Ron can enter now. Not to mention the boss inside, even a small monster can kill him in seconds. Mr. Herman. Ron's voice broke the silence. Herman's body shivered violently, and his face turned pale. His neck kept moving and he swallowed. Why was Ron calling his name at this time? Could it be that he still wanted to settle the score? He is a prophet. Could it be that he wanted him to kneel down and call him Grandpa? What are you going to do? Herman's voice was trembling. Ron smiled softly as usual, and even apologized to Herman. I'm very sorry, Mr. Herman, for humiliating you before, but this is all destined. Several black lines appeared on Herman's forehead. Could it be that I am destined to be humiliated by you? Ron replied briskly. Of course, this is your destiny. Herman was speechless for a moment, and he even had the urge to scold his mother. Was it his fate to be slapped in the face by Ron? What kind of bullshit fate is this? Wait, does this arrangement of fate have any special meaning? For example, is this a test for yourself? It must be. He is too good, so the goddess of fate deliberately arranges some setbacks and hardships for him. Got it, he got it. He must be the legendary chosen one, so he will be weaved into the future by the goddess of fate. And Ron was just a stepping stone on his growth path. The reason why this guy told himself this was actually to please himself. He wants to explain that humiliating himself was not his intention, and hopes that he will not cause trouble to him in the future when he becomes famous. Dream. From the moment he humiliated himself, he already had a way to die. Herman, who was still scared at first, suddenly became elated. He raised his head high, his nostrils pointed upward, and looked at everyone around him from the corner of his eye, as if looking at a pile of garbage. Gerald, right, you look down on me on weekdays, but you will be the one to look after me when the time comes. Virgil, right, you dared to betray me just now. I will kill you after I become successful. As for Aurelia, although Herman was very dissatisfied with her daring to show off his face, she was really beautiful. When he thought of Aurelia timidly admitting her mistake in front of him with tears in her eyes, begging for another chance, Herman's heart burned inexplicably. He even felt that Aurelia's indifferent temperament now was more attractive than her timid and well-behaved temperament before. Only a man as good as himself is worthy of such a woman. How much he despised Aurelia before, Herman now longs for Aurelia. Herman exhaled 2 strong breaths from his nostrils. He couldn't wait to let all the people who looked down on him before understand how bad their vision was. Herman's change in attitude was obviously noticed by Gerald, Virgil and Aurelia, and they all didn't understand what happened to this man. He suddenly became so crazy. But at this moment, no one has time to care about Herman. Although the Dragon Clan is not directly extinct now, the scenes in the prophetic poem have already been staged. This matter is really involved. I have to go to the headquarters immediately. After a short silence, Gerald said in a deep voice. Virgil, after I leave, you will take over the affairs of the church branch for the time being. You must protect Mr. Ron's safety and do not let Mr. Ron encounter any danger. Virgil nodded heavily. I understand, the Archbishop should be more careful. Although the two belong to different factions and have many differences with each other, Virgil also understands that now is not the time to dwell on such trivial matters. Ron's prophetic poem did not reveal what the next disaster will be, but anyone who is not a fool can imagine what will happen to the world after the demise of the Dragon Clan. Gerald didn't even have time to return to his residence to prepare. He walked straight out of the city without stopping. Virgil turned to look at Ron. At this moment, Virgil's attitude became more and more respectful. Perhaps, the prophet does not have particularly strong fighting power. However, the ability to see into the future gives a prophet unparalleled value. Virgil is very shrewd. He knows better than anyone else that the Church of the Goddess of Dawn will never allow such an existence to slip away. No matter what the cost, Ron will definitely be kept in the church. Even if Ron is not a member of the Church of the Dawn Goddess now, his status is no longer comparable to his own. If a person like this can build a good relationship, the benefits will be countless. Mr. Ron, can you please stay at the Church of the Dawn Goddess for a while? Virgil said with a smile. He was not stupid enough to continue asking Ron about the future. Ron did not throw out a bunch of riddles like other prophets, but directly revealed a lot of content, which is quite rare. If you continue to ask questions, you might even arouse Ron's disgust. Moreover, the prophet may have various taboos, and not everything about the future can be revealed. Ron smiled and nodded. Your Excellency, this is my honor. However, can you please let me stay here for a while? Don't worry, it won't be too long. I still have some things to pack. Of course. Virgil looked at Aurelia. Sister Aurelia, you stay here to help Mr. Ron clean up, and then take Mr. Ron to the church. While speaking, Virgil gave Ron a strange look. He is not an idiot, how could he not see the ambiguity between Ron and Aurelia? And judging from Aurelia's attitude, the corner of the wall is obviously crooked. This is normal, putting Ron and Herman together. A gentle and elegant gentleman, gentle and considerate to women, with unfathomable strength and even the ability to peek into the future. A rude and violent man who did not give any comfort to his fiancée when she might be harmed. Instead, in order to protect his reputation, he simply broke off the engagement with his fiancée. After knowing that his fiancée was still pure, he licked his face and wanted to be with her. Although there is some background to the reconciliation of the fiancé, this background is not worth mentioning in the face of the identity and ability of the prophet. Comparing the two, as long as there are no flaws in the brain, everyone knows how to choose. Virgil was also very happy to provide Ron and Aurelia with a chance. When Herman next to him heard this, his expression changed immediately. Aurelia is becoming more and more indifferent to him, and the distance between the two is getting farther and farther. If Ron and Aurelia are left alone, no one can guarantee what will happen. Of course, Aurelia was conservative and well-behaved by nature. Even if the two were alone, they would never completely cross the line and hand her pure body to Ron. But even if it was just holding hands, hugging, or kissing, Herman couldn't accept it. His woman must remain absolutely pure and cannot tolerate any blasphemy. His woman must not be taken away by Ron. Bishop Virgil. Herman tried to stop him. However, before he could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by Virgil. Knight Herman, come with me to appease the people in the city. Your Excellency, I will stay here too. Herman was still struggling. Virgil's expression turned cold and he glanced at Herman. Knight, this is an order. Herman's expression froze, and a trace of resentment flashed in his eyes. Virgil, is he ready to completely switch to Ron's side? It's really a bat that only sees the wind and makes rudder. This stupid guy has no idea who the real son of destiny is. He swore that sooner or later, he would make him pay. But now, the official level is overwhelming, and a mere knight captain has no qualifications to challenge the bishop. Herman took a deep breath, barely suppressed the anger in his heart, threw a warning look at Ron, and then followed Virgil away. Ron is a prophet, he should know what will happen if he offends his destiny. As for Ron, the smile on his face became more and more intense. It was great. Fortunately, Herman was as stupid as in the game. No, he was arrogant. He regained his courage. Ron was really worried that Herman would collapse. After all, Ron needed power now. If you want to quickly increase your strength, on the one hand, you need to equip weapons and strengthen them, and on the other hand, you need system rewards. The system will only be activated when there is danger of death. In this case, letting Herman trigger the system task is the best choice. After all, this guy is stupid and arrogant and can reduce the risk of death to the lowest point. To put it simply, Ron regards Herman as a monster that can refresh super quickly and constantly explode gold coins. He believes that Herman can bring him countless benefits. Ron turned around and walked into the living room again. He wanted to search this branch again to see if he could find the lost notebook. Aurelia followed quietly. Looking at the not-so-wide and tall figure, Aurelia bit her lower lip gently with her teeth. She called out, Ron. Ron turned around. Only then did he realize that Aurelia seemed to have changed her clothes. A pair of beautiful legs are reflected on the smooth floor. The nun's uniform seems to be different from the previous style. The skirt is looser and symmetrical on both sides of the waist. The religious pattern of the cross in the rising sun makes Aurelia look more holy. Ron smiled. I haven't had the chance before, but I have to say, Aurelia, your outfit is really beautiful. Sure enough, he noticed that he had changed his clothes. He was really attentive. There was a hint of spring in her pretty fair face. After a brief hesitation, Aurelia's body rotated gently in front of Ron, and the skirt of the nun's uniform spread out like butterfly wings. Light and fluttering, like falling petals. Below the hem of the skirt are wrapped under black stockings, making her legs look increasingly round, straight and slender. Perfect shape, full breath, delicate black silk. Ron's heartbeat seemed to slow down by half a beat at this moment. Does it look good? Aurelia's anxious voice came from the front. Ron took a deep breath and seemed to be able to feel the fragrance released by Aurelia in the air. I swear, this is the most beautiful scenery. The ever-suspicious heart finally settled down, and Aurelia smiled lightly. A simple smile, pure and charming. After a long time, Aurelia took a deep breath. She seemed to muster up all the courage, raised her head, and stared into Ron's eyes with her amber eyes. That look even made Ron afraid to face it. The pressure of life and death, the fear of being violated, the rudeness, indifference and divorce of her fiancé, this short day was definitely the most vulnerable, desperate and chaotic moment in her life. And this is also the moment when it is easiest to have a good impression of the person who saved her. Aurelia is simple and extreme. Most women may be afraid of new relationships when they are emotionally hurt, but Aurelia is different. She will go crazy and desperately hold on to the existence that can make her feel warm. But even so, the progress shouldn't be so fast. This is too exaggerated. Aurelia doesn't know what's going on. It's like there is some mysterious power that has been there. Guide her. At this moment, she just wanted to establish a bond with Ron that could never be severed, and she just wanted Ron to leave a mark on her body, in her soul, and on her body that would never be erased. Finally, Aurelia's lips opened, and her clear and trembling voice echoed in the hall. Ron, I like you. Beep. The system prompts that Aurelia's favorability towards the host has increased. The current favorability is 80, level, understanding and dedication. Aurelia's favorability towards him increased too quickly, as if there was something behind her that kept pushing Aurelia closer to her. Understanding and devotion. This is the penultimate level of the emotional hierarchy, second only to the highest level of love until death. It is also a level that most couples cannot reach in their lifetime. Once you reach this level of favorability, you can basically unlock everything. Ron's expression was abnormal, and his eyes involuntarily turned to the side. He didn't know how to face Aurelia's burning gaze. Call. After a long time, Ron sighed. Has your problem been solved? Aurelia bit her lip and nodded slightly. My innocence has been confirmed after the examination by the church nuns. Well, great, haven't you reconciled with Herman? Ron blinked. Aurelia shook her head quietly. Why? Ron spread his hands and said, I can tell that guy probably prefers you. Aurelia snorted coldly, the curve of her mouth showing slight contempt. What he likes is my chastity, not me. Once I understand this, Herman will leave no trace in my heart. Ron admired in his heart, it was indeed Aurelia. Underneath her seemingly weak appearance, she has an extremely strong heart. When she loves someone, she will love him to death. When she is completely desperate for someone, she can cut off the obsession in her heart without hesitation. Her amber eyes kept staring at Ron, showing no sign of moving away. She was waiting for Ron's answer. I like you. Although a long time has passed, Aurelia's clear voice still seems to be echoing in Ron's ears. Just thinking that this was the first time in his 2 lives that a girl confessed his love, Ron felt a little bitter in his heart. However, Ron knew that he had to respond. He let out a long breath. You know, I am a prophet. I can see some futures. I may have many women. This is the absolute worst answer for a girl to get from her crush. Before they even confirmed the relationship, they just made it clear that they would definitely cheat on each other in the future. Is there anything more stupid than this? With Aurelia's character, she would probably just turn around and leave, maybe she would spit on the scumbag again, right? But what Ron didn't expect was that Aurelia's body only swayed slightly, and then immediately stabilized again. She had no intention of leaving at all, and even opened her long legs and actively approached Ron. The most natural body fragrance wafting from Aurelia could be smelled in her nose. The soft hair swayed gently with the movement of the body. The approaching body even gave Ron the urge to retreat, but Aurelia's slender fingers had already grasped his collar, and then, her slim body stood up on tiptoes. Pink cherry lips lightly pressed against Ron's lips. The blockade was easily broken. After a long time, they finally separated. Aurelia's eyes had become blurred, and her pretty face was flushed, releasing a temptation that drove Ron almost crazy. Faintly, it seems that there is a special fragrance on Aurelia's body, which is sweet and greasy, constantly teasing Ron's already sensitive nerves. Slender and soft fingers gently stroked Ron's cheek, and a silly smile appeared on Aurelia's face. I don't care. This is Aurelia's answer, this is Aurelia's attitude. She just wanted to have Ron. As for other things, Aurelia had never considered them. Love me. These two words are more intense than the stimulation of the love potion. Could it be said that this is the effect of world-line convergence? Ron completely let go of the shackles in his heart and gave up. Aurelia's hot and graceful body seemed to become the most perfect map in the world in Ron's eyes. He wanted to explore this new area. He wanted to know how many mysteries were hidden on this map. With so many treasures, he tried to leave his own footprints on this map. Aurelia's long and pointed chin rested on Ron's shoulder, her body twisting uneasily and expectantly. The warm air blew Ron's ears, and his soft breathing revealed silky charm. She wanted to take off her nun uniform and pantyhose. However, this move was firmly opposed by Ron. That's how it is. Perish. Never mind. The other side. The main street of Larnaca. Herman was leaning against a wall to avoid the scorching sun above his head. His face was gloomy to the extreme, and he was very dissatisfied with Virgil's arrangement. That idiot actually left Aurelia with Ron. Didn't he know that this was a very dangerous move? What is so good about that Ron that he can actually make Gerald and Virgil look at him differently? Two idiots who have no idea who is worthy of fawning over. Disaster. Yes, there is indeed a disaster coming. Herman does not deny Ron's ability in prophecy. But, can't Virgil and Gerald see Ron's attitude towards him? Why did Ron say the prophecy in front of him, and why did he apologize to himself? There is only one possibility, and that is that he, Herman, is the hero who can suppress disasters and save the world. Ron was almost completely spread out, but the two guys just couldn't see it, they were blind. As for Aurelia, I thought that as long as I lowered my attitude a little and apologized a little, Aurelia would come back to me. I really didn't expect that she would reject him with an unprecedented cold attitude. But the more Aurelia refuses, the more Herman wants her. When Aurelia was always by his side, Herman was used to it. But after losing Aurelia, he realized that this woman's position in his heart was far more important than he imagined. What you can't get is always in commotion. No matter what, he must get Aurelia and win back Aurelia's heart. I don't know what Aurelia is doing now. It couldn't be that he was doing this or that with Ron. A series of bad images suddenly appeared in Herman's mind. His face suddenly turned pale, and he stood up suddenly, wanting to rush to Ron's side. However, the steps he took soon stopped. Impossible, absolutely impossible. He is simply overthinking. Aurelia is a very conservative girl. No matter what, it is absolutely impossible for her to hand over her pure body and most precious virginity to a man she has just met for a day. Herman thought he knew Aurelia well enough. She is very beautiful, with a graceful figure, but her personality is extremely conservative, forming two extremes with her own charm. Perhaps, pure desire is the most appropriate word to describe it. Before the relationship between the two broke down, Herman had made some requests to Aurelia more than once, but Aurelia rejected her every time. Even just holding hands is absolutely impossible. In Aurelia's eyes, even if they are engaged, as long as they don't become a real couple for a day, any physical contact is blasphemy to the goddess. Therefore, although Ron and Aurelia are alone now, there is basically nothing to worry about. With Aurelia's character, she will never do this, leaving her body to a man she has just known for less than a day. A wild thing. Thinking of this, Herman felt much more at ease. But the empty feeling of loss in his chest became stronger and stronger, as if something important was getting further and further away from him. Shaking his head vigorously, Herman suppressed the annoyance in his heart. He looked up at the sky. In fact, if he thought about it for a moment, he would know that there was no possibility of a relationship between Ron and Aurelia. After all, how could he and Aurelia's relationship of more than 10 years be completely destroyed just by a few words? Ruined. Ron is just an outsider after all. He believes that Aurelia still loves him. Presumably Aurelia was just angry with him. Although she seemed to be closer to Ron, she probably just wanted to use Ron to make him jealous. Really cunning. That's all, that's all. This time I will follow Aurelia's wishes and buy a bouquet of roses. I will choose a good day to apologize to Aurelia and make an appointment. As long as I have a better attitude, this matter should be over. Humph, Ron, you still want to snatch a woman from this young master. Have your spring and autumn dreams. When Aurelia returns to his side, I wonder what Ron's expression will be. It must be exciting, right? I don't know what picture came to mind, and Herman giggled loudly. Be careful. Get out of the way. Just as Herman was grinning stupidly, a frightened scream suddenly came from above his head. The sharp sound pulled Herman out of his delusion. He subconsciously raised his head, his expression suddenly changed, and he didn't even care about his own demeanor. He rolled over on the spot and rolled to the side. Behind Herman was a dyeing shop, and above his head was a dye vat filled with dye that fell from the wooden frame. Even with Herman's strength, if he was hit by such a big vat full of dye, the result would definitely not be much better, and he might just be smashed into pulp. Seeing the big vat falling in front of his eyes, Herman felt proud. Fortunately, I reacted quickly. But this kind of pride did not last long. Before Herman could even get up from the ground, the dye vat was smashed down where Herman was originally. There was only a crackling sound, and a large amount of dye rushed around. Shoot out. Poof. An unknown amount of liquid was sprayed all over Herman. From head to toe, it was all sticky. With the green dye, Herman's whole body was covered in green, and even his eyes were covered with a layer of emerald green. Herman's good mood was shattered in an instant, and he cursed. I hate green. Chapter of the Eternal Free Church. Even the midday sun cannot dispel the gloominess of the branch. The weird reliefs release depressing evil all the time. As a large number of believers left, the place fell into tranquility. But this tranquility was broken by a creaking sound, like a long decaying table shaking on the ground. Aurelia's silver hair hung down on the edge of the table. Fall. They forgot time, everything around them, and even where this place was. Right in the hall, there is a 3-meter-tall statue. The sculpture of the statue is lifelike. Compared to exquisiteness, perhaps elegance and charm are more suitable for the temperament of this statue. That is the statue of the God of Eternal Liberty. He is half male and half female, both male and female. The male half is majestic and rugged, while the female half is graceful and enchanting, both revealing a crazy charm. The two people who were intoxicated with joy did not even notice that the originally stiff statue of the god and the eyeballs carved from stone in the sunken eye sockets seemed to suddenly come to life, and the eyeballs were slowly turning, as if they wanted to direct his gaze towards him. Two people on the desk. This scene contains an indescribable gloominess in its weirdness. If there were a third person present, they would definitely be stimulated by this scene and scream loudly. It was just a statue carved from stone, and it was really alive. The statue opens its eyes. Almost at the same time, Elsa of the system left Ron lightly. She was like an indifferent spectator, staring at everything with her black and white eyes. She flew to the beam and sat quietly. The sounds and images in the room didn't seem to have any impact on Elsa. Her beautiful, goddess-like face remained ethereal and indifferent. Suddenly, Elsa's eyes raised slightly, and her black and white gaze fell silently on the statue of the God of Eternal Freedom. Buzz. In an instant, the marble eyes in the eye sockets of the statue expanded visibly to the naked eye, and a rich light purple light was released from the depths of the eye sockets, and the entire room was enveloped in a layer of purple haze. This process lasted less than 1/10 of a second, and it passed so quickly that Ron and Aurelia, who were so happy, were not even aware of this momentary change. The open eyes of the statue slowly closed. It seems that everything that happened before was just an illusion. Only the corners of the statue's mouth were slightly curved. He seems to be smiling. Then, there seemed to be a snapping sound. There is an extra crack on the tall statue, from the forehead to the lower abdomen, neatly divided into 2 halves. Growling and screaming also sounded at this moment. Aurelia's body trembled as if she had been electrocuted. Ron's eyes suddenly turned white, and he seemed to have lost all ability to think in an instant. A ray of purple-black light suddenly shot out from the male half of the statue and merged into Ron's body. In the female half of the statue, a ray of light pink light quietly penetrated into Aurelia's belly. A heart-shaped pattern with small wings gradually appeared on the fair skin. After a few seconds, the pattern gradually disappeared, completely submerged in Aurelia. Call. There seemed to be a dark wind blowing through the hall with the doors and windows tightly closed. Immediately afterwards, there was a rustling sound. The statue that split into 2 pieces began to weather silently, turning into fine dust and passing away in the wind. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.